Alright guys, digital clips, that's a small amount of beer in my bloodstream. Kinda tiny. Gold Master series. My goal for this summer is to finish Karateka. If it's half as big as I dream it may be, that should be enough to launch me into video game world. Jordan Mechner, 18 years old, 4th of May 1983. So it's actually not really a game. I think it's just some kind of, I don't know, arts and stuff. Maybe, yeah. Let's press enter to start. I didn't play that. Maybe played a long time ago at Karateka, but I know it's kind of famous. Well, those are chapters. 5 chapters. First chapter, Dead Bones. The making of masterpiece. How did a teenager with an Apple II design one of the most influential games of all time? Explore the making of Jordan Mechner Karateka's below, or view the games maybe with the top. At first Jordan Mechner wanted to create an arcade-style shooter. The lessons he learned from his rejection will inspire the creation of Karateka. Let's start. Dreams of stardom. Teenage programming prodigy Jordan Mechner didn't want to wait around to get into the video game industry, not when he had an Apple II and a dream of striking it rich. He just needed a killer idea. I guess I pronounced his name right, last name. Introduction. Playing the movies. In 1984, Brother Bond released the debut game of a young developer named Jordan Mechner. Karateka would prove to be one of the most influential games of the era, inspiring a generation of designers with its many groundbreaking leaps in cinematic techniques, animation, story, characters, and music. We could play the video. Left shift show captions.
So, this is a MediaMate, and it contains a bunch of 5 and a quarter inch discs. There's a lot of classics in here, including Wolfenstein and Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, which inspired us later. And just behind that is the game, Karateka. Love it. It's so good.
I remember seeing Karateka and wanting it, and then not have enough money to buy it. But I think I saved up some money, and I eventually went back and got it. I was sold on the box artwork alone. Kind of told a story. I remember the illustration was really well done. And again, just kind of told a story of what that game was. And yeah, eventually I picked it up and started playing it.
When I first loaded it up, what I expected was something down the lines of Karate Champ or similar head-to-head beat-em-ups. Instead, what I got was a cinematic experience. That's what blew my mind, right? The fact that it started with, a text crawl, right out of, which to my mind, that was right out of Star Wars, right? That cinematic experience is the thing that was just amazing, right? It was the most movie-like experience I'd ever had in a video game at that point.
It really felt like, you're a karate hero in a movie. That's fantastic. All the other things feel like bleeps and bloops, and this is like, movie making. It was amazing.
Yeah, I was just very impressed by the fluidity of the animation. And the kicks look great. The punches look great. They were always capped off with a little bit of a sound, a little kia. Yeah, the fluidity of the motion, I think, really set the stage for the rest of what I had consumed about that game.
The animation was cool, and that was very innovative, obviously, at the time. The process and the beginning of animation getting better and better, right? And more cinematic. Taking cues from the movie industry. But I think the storytelling was probably one of the first. I can't think of another game at the time that had that element to it.
The characters were not little sets of pixels. They, in fact, were fully formed individuals. They had personalities. They had strengths and weaknesses. You've got to remember the level of graphics that people were doing at that time, and they were on the sophisticated side for that time.
Karateka was historically a very significant game, and it saw the future before anybody else did. Part of it was because it understood the language of cinema, that visuals mattered, that full motion mattered, that human beings and characters and characterization, and storytelling and music mattered in a way that we take for granted now when we see games. Games that are at least as complex as films.
And a common knock against a lot of game developers today is that they want to be movie makers. But gosh, you could almost look at Karateka as sort of the original apple from the tree of knowledge there. It was really in a lot of ways the first game that put together fluidity of motion, cinematic shots, story arc, twists, filmic language, and pointed the way towards a marriage of film movie style storytelling and gameplay.
Karateka. Wow, that was a nice introduction. Yeah, I didn't play that stuff, but I know about that. Jordan Mechner, born in 1964, Jordan Mechner quickly developed a love of cartooning, envisioning a career in comics. That all changed when he discovered computers. By 13, he was already contributing math-heavy articles about the Apple II to Creative Computing magazine with titles like In Search of P and Pascal's Triangle. What's it all about? That's his picture. Alright, I didn't even born in that time. I mean, when the Karateka was made, Apple II. Part of the first wave of home computers sold in 1977, the Apple's second color graphics and ease of use made in early February, and the first device that introduced computers into the homes of millions of Americans. This quickly created a mass market for video game software, open to any Apple II owner skilled enough to create some. At Apple II, 1979, Jordan with two family friends, circa 1979, sitting at the Apple II that year when he was 14. Jordan sold his first game to a publisher. The company, Soft-Tape, paid him $25 for his game called Maze, intending to put it in a collection of Apple II games on a cassette tape. It does not seem that Maze was ever released. We had ZX Spectrum. My dad never can record any video game on a cassette tape. Apples and asteroids. More than anything, 14-year-old Jordan Mechner wanted an Apple II. He set up the money he made doing caricatures at local fairs to buy one. Once he had his own computer, he immediately started creating games, including a version of a popular arcade game that was almost published. Well, let's play a video.
You actually got started when you kept going to the local arcade and you kept borrowing quarters to put in the arcade machine to do, what was it, not Star Wars.
Space Invaders?
No.
Asteroids?
Asteroids, yeah. You were completely addicted to asteroids. Every day you couldn't wait to go to the arcade to put some more quarters in that machine. To play asteroids.
And that was 1980, so by then I was already in high school. It's pretty embarrassing if I was borrowing quarters from you.
From everybody. But I gave you the quarters, and then you decided you had to program your own asteroids. Why leave it to the arcade? And you said, I can do this on my computer. You were caricaturing when you were 9 years old.
The caricaturing, yeah.
But you did it because you wanted to use the money to buy an Apple computer.
The way I remember it, I was 12, 13 years old. I was doing the caricatures, I was doing the Cookie magazine, you had my Mad magazine, parody. And really I wanted to do comics and animated films, but this was before computers came along. So I think if the Apple II hadn't been invented when it was, I probably would have just kept on making comics.
Okay, but I remember that you went to those street fairs, to those town fairs, to earn money to buy yourself an Apple computer.
Yeah. And I didn't know what the money was going to be for, but it was, at least in the beginning.
Yeah, but later on you were definitely trying to save up I think you needed $900 to buy an Apple computer?
Yeah, 1200.
1200.
That was the price of a 16K
So,
Apple II.
So to translate that into today's money, you can multiply maybe by 6. That's real money.
I know it was all the money I had.
Yeah.
And then even after doing the caricatures,
then you
I
borrowed
didn't
from
have
Emily
it.
to get for the last $100. You borrowed it from Emily. So then you started programming games. So the first one was Asteroids.
Asteroids was actually, I mean, it took a couple of years to get to that point because my first games were in BASIC. You know, there was a game called Breakout on the Apple II. It had colored blocks and you have a kind of a paddle. It's very simple. It's a ball bouncing and you try to knock out the blocks.
Yes, right.
And so I would look at these programs written in BASIC and try to deconstruct how they'd been done.
Mm-hmm.
And IBM had the Thomas J. Watson Research Center Explorers program. Once a week, my friend Adrian would drive me after high school to IBM, and they would let us kids come in and use the computers after hours. So that's where I first started learning how to program BASIC and APL.
I see.
And then with the Apple, it had BASIC, but it also had machine language, which was more of a mystery. It took longer to learn that.
Yeah. I remember that you did program Asteroids. You worked on that quite a while, and it was so good, such a good replica of Asteroids that a New Jersey company bought it from you. They paid you a lot of money.
Well, maybe, I think it was $400.
That was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money, and it was the first money that I'd earned by programming.
Yeah.
And I was keeping track of it.
It was fabulous, and you had a royalty position, and you thought you would make a lot more money from the royalty, but then they got sued, and they had to stop the whole thing because it was too good a replica of Asteroids.
Yeah, that's right. That's almost exactly how it happened. The best-selling Apple game at that time was Space Invaders, and they sold, I don't know how many, but I figured out that if I could do that for Asteroids, that would be my ticket.
Yeah, and you were right. I mean, if they hadn't gotten sued, you would have.
If that'd been a year earlier, right, that was just about the time that Atari kind of figured out what was going on, and they sent threatening letters to all of the new game publishers saying you can't publish copies of our games, and the Asteroids never got
published. That was a big letdown.
Oh, game over. Apples and Asteroids. 1980, on the dotted line. Since there were few official Apple II versions of popular arcade games, clones like the one Jordan created could be quite lucrative. Hayden Software, publisher of the popular chess game Sargon, gave 16-year-old Jordan a $750 advance and 50% royalty for his Asteroids. His father Francis had to co-sign the contract. Hayden Book Company published an agreement. 1980. 1981, Asteroid Blaster. Jordan's Asteroid game went through several title changes. First it was Asteroid Belt. By that time of this prototype version, 1981, it was Asteroid Blaster. In this version, the graphics were still highly reminiscent of the arcade game on which it was unofficially based. Well, I could play some stuff. I could play Asteroids, right? How to do that stuff? Play game. Begin playing. At the time, press escape. Jordan's taken popular arcade game Asteroids and official clones. Let's try that stuff. Asteroids. Real quick. Copyright 1981. It's like how it called Galaxian. Oh what? No, not really. So they just have to destroy asteroids. And when I shoot them, the speed got faster. When I shoot them, there's they just divided into mini asteroids. Asteroid stone, and there's some kind of UFO. By the way, I have lives over there and the points. Anyway, let's lose all my lives. I have two, I guess. One left. And let's see. It's gonna be a game over. Very simple one. 1984, come on. 46.50, I guess I lost. Game over. Any high score? Well, we'll start again anyway. I'll load game, reset game, save game, show control, screen mode. Let's quit it. Nice. Well, Jordan Mechner, Yale man. In the fall of 1981, when he was 17, Jordan entered Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. A few hours train right away from his family home in Chappaqua, New York. There he started taking karate classes and joined the film society. I used to attend karate classes too. But it doesn't matter. Star Blaster. By the end of 1981, Hayden still had not published Jordan's game and was requesting that he make further changes to make it less similar to the arcade game on which it was originally based. This included more title changes, first to Space Rocks and to Star Blaster. Let's play the Star Blaster, a later version of Jordan's Astro Blaster, an official clone of the popular Atari arcade game Asteroids. Publisher Hayden Software, fearing reprisal from Atari, and asked Jordan to remove all references to the word asteroid. Unfortunately, even this was not enough to convince the publisher to release the game, and it never shipped. Whoa. Star Blaster. 1981. I didn't even born. Well, he's shooting faster now. I have 5 lives, by the way. I'm not gonna lose them all. I guess, like, let's play it till the first death. There's some skull. Flying skull. More asteroids. Star Blaster. Yeah, I lost the first one. Enough. Alright, 1982. Jordan the journaler. At the beginning of his second semester at Yale, Jordan began keeping a daily journal. He kept this up all throughout his college career and beyond, meticulously documenting the development of his early Apple II games. Ah, wait. I even can go down at some parts. Astro Blaster design documents. Crazy, I don't know. I learned it from Hayden Software. Well, you see, like I'm not only left and right, at some part I can go down. January 27, 1982, about this journal. My basic intention is to write down at the end of each day what happened, what I did, thought, felt, and so forth, so I can read it years from now and remember what it was like. 18 February 1982. I missed all my classes today. Music, philos discussion group, sociology. Shit, what's the matter with me? Free game concepts. Having abandoned Star Blaster, Jordan started generating several ideas for the original game, sticking within the arcade shooter game. His intent was to write 3 or 4 games during his first summer break from Yale. Some detail here: Plug, Bubble Blaster, and Satellite, later called Earth. Plug. Spiders come down. Shoot spiders before they cannot read. Bubble Blaster. Essentially asteroids, but instead of what? Satellite. Play screen layout. Apple Video Display Worksheet. Icebreaker screen layout. Another idea: Icebreaker had the player ship at the top of the screen, avoiding ice beasts and shooting down through a layer of ice to hit enemy bases on the ocean floor. Revenge of the Arcadians, another unproduced concept was Revenge of the Arcadians, which would have combined many different familiar looking enemies from arcade game culture in a single asteroid style shooting contest. That's Pac-Man. There are more pages here. Armor Attack, Star Castle, Specials, Phoenix, Ready, Game Over. Red Squares. Nice. Jordan Journals, March 11, 1982. I've got a good thing going here. The Apple is still the first #1 computer arcade games are the #1 sellers, and I'm writing Apple II arcade games, so I should try them out and make lots of money while I can. This summer I'll write 3 or 4. I should establish a working relationship with some of the other publishers, not hate them. Serious Broadband. Well, enter Dead Bones. In the end, the game that Jordan decided to create next was Dead Bones, another take on asteroid genre. This one would feature multicolored bouncing balls that ricocheted off the walls of the arena. Dead Bones design documents on graph paper from various stages of production. The Spike enemy does not appear in any known prototype of Dead Bones and was likely replaced with the rover. Dead Bones. March 21, 1992, I got a letter from Doug Carlson at Brotherband, free software submission. Like Brotherband, I'll send them a letter describing Bones. Doug's letter mentioned that they might even pay a AFF for programmers to come work with them. Whoa! Out in sunny California, oh man, I wanted it so bad. April 17, 1982. I hereby vow no more work on this project until Friday, until psych paper, history paper, psych test, philosophy paper, music out of the way. Then finish the game during reading period, then a week of exams, and whoops, freshman year will be over and I'll have to pack my stuff and go home. Letter to Brotherband, March 1982. As he neared completion of the first version of Dead Bones, Jordan reached out to the publisher Brotherband to gauge its interest. He finished programming on April 28, 1982 and mailed Brotherband a disc on April 29. Alright, Yale Station 2018. Wow, that's not the year. Doug Carlson, Brotherband Software, 1938, 4th Street, San Rafael. Dear Mr. Castle, I've written an Apple II game, Dead Bones, that I like if you consider publishing. It's a machine language, high resolution shoot 'em up video game. High risk. If you're interested, please let me know and I'll send you a copy on the disc. Sincerely, Jordan Mechner. Dead Bones version 1. The first version of Dead Bones, April 28, 1982, implements the elements in Jordan's original design on paper. Multicolored balls bounce haphazardly around the playfield, plus large white ball called the Rover, inspired by the 1960s British TV show The Prisoner, that specifically targets a player's ship. The player can put up a temporary shield that causes enemies to bounce on them. Letter to Brotherband. Letter from Jordan to Doug Carlson, CEO of Brotherband, accompanying the Dead Bones disc. Jordan wrote this letter on the same day that he finished the first version of Dead Bones. He didn't have a color monitor in his dorm room, so he had to verify the colors at his local computer store. Dear Mr. Carlson, the enclosed disc contains a copy of Dead Bones. The Apple game I described in my letters of 22 March and 14 April. You telephoned on 20 April and asked to see it. To run the game, type run Dead Bones. Since the program keeps track of the top 10 scores on disk, The disc should be left in a drive with the door closed while the program is running. The object of the game is to score points by shooting the bouncing balls. The game ends when your supply of chips has run out. Green and violet balls are worth 25 points. Red and blue balls are worth 50 points. The white ball rover is worth 100 points. A bonus ship is awarded at 2000 points and from 10 on for every 4000 points. The following keys control your ship: A. Rotate left, S. Stop rotating, D. Rotate right. The spacebar turns shield on and off, left arrow thrust, and right arrow fire. The push button may be used to rotate instead of the A, S, D, and keys button 1 to okay. During the game you can also use escape, freeze and unfreeze the screen, Control S, turn sound on and off, and Control A aboard game. The disk, by the way, is control data, which means that you should probably close, reopen and reclose the door of the Apple Drive after inserting the disk to make sure it centers properly. If you have any questions or problems, feel free to call. My number is 203-432-0130 till 11 May, 914-238-9396 after 11 May. Looking forward to hearing from you. Alright. Doug Carlson call, he say he likes Dead Bonds but feels it needs more complexity in the way of colorful cartoon animation detail. Let's read it up. Dear Jordan, although I wrote to you about a week ago, I can find a copy of the letter in the file, so it's possible that the letter got zapped before printing. On the theory that 2 letters are better than none, I thought that I'd give you my reactions to Dead Bonds again. Basically, we think you're excellent programmers and hope to work with you. As I said on the phone, the main problem with Dead Bonds is a lack of visual complexity. Although clean lines are essential, complexity needs to be introduced at some level, either by adding new and unexpected events at different stages of the game, or by adding elements of complexity in the strategy. Your game is too simple right now. Nonetheless, we would like to continue to work with you, even elaborating on Dead Bonds, or if you prefer designing and developing an entirely new game. Write a call and give us your reaction, and we will respond with a concrete proposal. I do want to add a personal apology. My secretaries don't originally lose my letters. I put them onto the Corvus from my office and they run them off out in theirs. Then delete them. I suspect that the latter two functions got reversed. Well, Dead Bonds version. Let's try it out. Hit space bar to play top 10 scorers. How to shoot them? I'm at the right. I could move. Got some bonus. No. Well, anyway, I'm bad at that stuff. Let's watch for a while. So you just stand at the corner. Let's come to an end. So there's a 5 minutes walkthrough, playthrough. Oh, there's some kind of shield. But yeah, that's way too simple for now. Alright. Anyway, 1982, version 2 of Dead Bonds. Jordan began work on a new version of Dead Bonds on June 1st, 1982. On June 4th, he turned 18. On June 15th, he mailed his new version to Brother Bond. The rover ball was now a wedge shape on the and on-screen power gauge now showed your remaining shield energy, and the balls now cycled through a series of colors before disintegrating. Letter to Brother Bond, June 1982. Enclosed is dead bonds. I've made the following changes. First, the balls come in 4 colors: red, violet, blue and green. When you shoot a ball, if it's red it explodes. If it's violet it turns red, if it's blue it turns violet, if it's green it turns blue. So red balls take 1 shot to kill. Violet balls take 2 shots, blue 3 and green 4. The first screen started with 4 red balls, the second with 4 violet, the third with 4 blue, the fourth with 4 green, the fifth with 5 greens, the sixth with 6 greens, and so on. Screens stand 10 up and have 10 greens. Hitting the ball scores 25 points, the red balls have 25 points, violet 50, blue 75 and green 100. The bonus for clearing the screen is equal to the total number of points scored in that screen, which is 100 the screen number up to screen 10. 1000 points for screens. Well, anyway, second. The amount of shield energy left is shown as red band across the top of the... I'm not gonna read it, I got it. That's 2 images. I gave our shipping department your folder to send out the joystick to you, and the folder never came back, so while they try to figure out where it went, I'm going to write you a second letter that repeats my other comments, just in case the earlier stuff got lost in the system. Well, that's all I have to say about that bonds now. Well, I'm not gonna read it. Tiny Planets, a description of game that Brother Bond wanted to join the program for the Apple II. It's yet another play on asteroids, only this time the player can land it on the different asteroids and a tiny person can jump out of the ship and collect gold nuggets on their surfaces. The player can then fly to the intergalactic bank to deposit their cash. Joining declined to create the game. Well, Tiny Planets. There are several asteroid-like objects spinning slowly and moving horizontally across the middle portion of the screen. On each asteroid are a few small pieces of gold. You control a spaceship that travels among the asteroids. By judicious use of your joystick, you can reverse your ship and land on the asteroids. At that point, the left-right action of the joystick controls a small man, actually almost the same size as the ship, who emerges and runs around the asteroid gathering up the gold. When he is returned to the ship and the joystick is pressed forward, the ship takes off. There are several places to go. In the lower left-hand area is a large, stable planet that serves as armory. There you can land and trade a piece of gold for a nose rocket. Actually, it happens automatically when you land. If you fly to the right long enough and the screen scrolls with you, you will come to another large planet which houses the intergalactic bank, where you can deposit your money and increase your score. You can also withdraw it from time to time to buy nose rockets. Your rocket can carry 5 pieces of gold if you don't have a nose rocket, and 3 if you do. Nose rockets are useful, even necessary, to protect you against the predations of the Empire battleship that hoves into view every once in a while at the top of the screen, scrolling slowly from one side of the screen until it is lost to sight at the other. The battleship has 3 extradable firing turrets along its bottom length. Whenever it spots you, one of these will ever so slowly unfold and then gradually direct its cannon at you. At this point you had better be well hidden behind an asteroid, since otherwise you are zapped. If however you have a nose rocket, you can line up on an unfolding gun turret and let fly. Your rocket will destroy the turret. If you destroy all 3 turrets, the battleship herself might become vulnerable, although you would have to fly right into the loading dock and let fly with the nose rockets into the dim interior. Occasionally a drone fighter will emerge from the battleship as well, although these are much slower than you are at full speed. They do not have your problems in steering among the asteroids without collision, and their relentless pursuit can stymy all of your mining exploration plans. Our details can be fleshed out once the game has been designed and the practical problems of implementation emerge. Alright, Dead Bonds version 3. On August 4, 1982, Jordan finished the third version of Dead Bonds, adding elements based on Carlson's suggestions: a joystick option, more animation on the bouncing balls, and a little man resembling the people in Burban's game shoplifter who climbs into and out of the spaceship. Letter to Broadband, Jordan's manual. Jordan's journalist Carlson said, among other things, that the game is first monotonous, too hard at first, too much a straight shoot 'em up without making much use of the maneuvering, which is the best feature, and too visually boring. I agree on all counts. I'm not gonna play again for a version. Maybe just take a quick look on that. For me, it's kind of safe stuff. Anyway, skipping class, making games. Jordan was an undergraduate at the prestigious Yale University when he created Dead Bones and Karateka, but his obsession with perfecting his games meant he had a lot of trouble keeping up with his studies. Increased class cutting, decreased homework, going to sleep later and later, mess piling up on my desk, putting things off, D on German midterm, 4 of 10 on CS assignment.
Jordan was from a different world when I met him.
I don't think I ever heard a single college-related story from him. He was in a different world. I think college was just a place he lived. At least that's the impression that he gave.
What did you think about me making games? The fact that I was in college, but I was taking my computer with me and spending most of my time on these games.
You know, I always encouraged everything you wanted to do. I was indiscriminate.
That's true. I don't remember you ever trying to discourage me or telling me that I should focus on my studies.
In our family, that's what works best. People follow their passions, and that usually leads to a good result.
And so Jordan was this really, like his father played Go, his father played chess, is just a very intellectual background. And yet Jordan was so into pop culture. Jordan loved all of the movies that had come out, Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all of those other movies, and also classics of cinema. So he was well versed in all of it. So he's this intellectual, like consummate intellectual, but is super into pop art forms as well. And I think Jordan managed to sort of gain control of his life, and everything else sort of fell away from that. His studies and everything, he started forgetting about.
I mean, I was getting pretty bad grades my freshman year. I was struggling. I had to drop a bunch of classes because I was spending all my time programming games. Did you even know that?
That didn't worry me because I knew that was common among high achievers.
Same thing with Bill Gates, although I think Bill's departure from Harvard was involuntary. But a lot of these guys, they're just in too much of a hurry to get on with it and didn't want to spend any more time wasting their time.
Alright, Dead Bones gets an intro. Jordan spent much of his 1982 winter break making what would turn out to be the final update to the Dead Bones. It now had a story and brief cinematic sequences. The player now boarded at a space train, advancing from car to car, defeating enemies. All the front car of the train, the player destroys the power generated and then has to escape. Go to the front of the train. Dead Bones version 4. The final version of Dead Bones, January 20, 1983. The bouncing balls are now X, thrown by the mother bat, which becomes smaller bats if not taken care of. The weight-shaped rover still pursues the player, who has to maneuver the ship through the doors to get to the front of the space train. Well, 1983, focus testing. Baraband put Jordan's final version of Dead Bones in front of a focus group of gamers who delivered some fairly harsh criticisms. They passed this along with some concrete advice. For now, Dead Bones could continue to improve. Letter from Baraband, March 1983. The back and forth over the Dead Bones having now gone on a full year. Jordan pushed Baraband to officially sign the game and pay him in advance. Baraband declined, and Jordan decided to quit working on Dead Bones. Besides, he already had another game design in mind. Well, let's read it. Dear Jordan, I'm truly sorry for not getting back to you before now. After the trip to Japan came the West Coast Computer Fair and lots of visiting programmers, so we did fall behind a little. I'm also sorry to report that we cannot give you an assurance that Dead Bones will publish nor can we make an advance payment. We have done occasionally in the past and it usually has not worked out. You show a great deal of skill in moving shapes around Dead Bones. I think you will agree if you have seen some of the newer games such as AE that the sophistication and possibilities in game programming are increasing rapidly and that it is an exciting field. If you do find time to make changes to Dead Bones or if you have a new game to submit, we would be happy to see it. Sincerely, Alice Carlston, Assistant in Product Development. Well, Dead Bones learning from rejection. Jordan thought Dead Bones was his ticket to video game superstardom, and it was, but not in the way he expected. The lesson Jordan learned from Brothers Band rejection of Dead Bones led him to pursue something much more innovative and original. Dead Bones Reborn, created by the designers of a digital Eclipse, Dead Bones Reborn that turns Jordan Mechner's original concept into an all-new modern-day twin-stick shooting experience. Gold Master Series, whoa. A lost classic reborn. Fast arcade action, deadly enemies, physics, and inertia rise in difficulty. The year is 6413. For as long as anyone can remember, the galaxy has been at peace. But one fateful day, the planet's defense system spots an anomalous array of near-Earth objects. Scientists determine that it is now not a deadly meteor shower, but when it draws close enough to identify it, their relief turns to panic. Ancient but powerful ships, known to history only as space trains, are blasting at light speed towards Earth, transporting a cargo of planet-obliterating bombs. Earth's advanced technological defenses are useless in the face of this ancient enemy. In desperation, the Earth's government taps a top-secret, highly experimental project. The Pentagon calls them the Reflective Spacecraft Division. They call themselves the Dead Bouncers. Man.
You did another one which was called Death Bounce, right?
Yeah, amazing. I'm amazed you can remember that. Yes, it was Death Bounce.
Death Bounce, yeah.
And it was kind of like asteroids, but just different enough to be original. Instead of the asteroids, it was bouncing colored balls, like pool balls, that ricocheted off the sides of the screen.
So what happened to that?
Well, that was the first game that I sent to Broderbund.
Oh yeah.
And I was in college. I was in my dorm room freshman year when the phone rang, and it was Doug Carlston, the president of Broderbund, saying, "Thanks for sending." That sent the game on a floppy disk, in the mail. That's how he did it then.
He was in college, and by his own admission, spending a lot more time learning to program than studying sociology or whatever it was he was majoring in down at Yale. He sent, I think his very first submission was something called Death Bounce. And I actually thought he was a pretty good coder, especially for somebody who obviously wasn't doing it full time. Although it turned out he was doing it a lot more full time than I realized.
And he said, it's well programmed, you're a good programmer, but this game is just a little bit old fashioned.
There was no plot, there was no story, there was nobody you cared about, there were just balls bouncing around doing different things. And although you could get away with that, I just thought it would be a much better product, not that particular one, but if he would try to come up with a storyline, a backstory for what he was doing. I did try to make it as much a not rejection as I could by telling him that I thought he was a keeper and he just needed to work on something that was a little bit different.
I got that phone call and he said, "I'm going to send you our new game, which is a big hit, called Choplifter, so you can see what this year's games look like."
That was Danny Gorlin, and it was a straight submission. And initially there wasn't a game. He just was really interested in what it would take to make a joystick fly a helicopter on the screen. And then he added a little rescue thing, and we eventually with him turned it into a game.
A Choplifter was, you controlled a helicopter, and the idea was to rescue hostages.
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of based on the Iran hostage crisis. And you had to fly your helicopter and rescue these little, 8-pixel high characters who are running around in the desert. It's a very simple game by today's standards, but what struck me about it was that it told a story.
That inspired you to think about Karateka?
Yeah, because when I saw Choplifter, it's like the state of the art of games had advanced. And that was kind of a revelation to me, because I realized that all the games that I'd been trying to make, Asteroids and Deathbounce, were really inspired by those coin-op arcade games, where you had 3 lives and you tried to rack up as many points as you could. But then with the home computers, games were sold on floppy disks, so you actually owned the game. So when I saw Choplifter, I realized that there's no need to make those kind of games, where people are going to keep playing to try to get a high score. A game can actually have an end. At the end of Choplifter, it doesn't say game over.
Yeah.
Put your quarter in, it says the end. And so that was new at the time, so that sort of was part of the inspiration for Karateka, to do a game that would also tell a story.
Alright, Dead Bones. 1983, I'm sad for Karateka. Fuck Dead Bones. What a waste. The value of rejection. Would there even be a Karateka if Dead Bones had succeeded? Only after attempting to get rich quick-off conversions of arcade games, did Jordan land on an original idea inspired by his own interests. Okay, let's continue. The chapter 2 started. An idea takes shape. While developing Dead Bones, Jordan begins work on Karate Tournament Simulator, but the early concepts soon gave the way to a different sort of game, Tomato Pie. The legendary Sally's a pizza on Wooster Street in New Haven was a popular hangout for yellers, including Jordan, while another 1980s video game character was said to have been inspired by pizza. With one slice removed, Jordan's inspiration would have to come out from elsewhere. Pizza. That's margarita or like cheese pizza. Earth design documents. Jordan had several arcade-style game ideas he wanted to work on during the 1982 summer break, and the first one he got started on was Earth, in which the player has to protect the blue planet at the center of the screen from various attacks. Earth demo. This early demo seems to be as far as Jordan got with Earth. You can rotate around the planet and drop objects. Jordan initially wanted to finish programming this game by the end of July 1982, but got distracted by a new idea. Blue planet. Just a real quick demo. The origin of Karateka. The Japanese martial art of karate was exploding in popularity in America in the early 1980s, and many members of the Meshner family began taking lessons. This inspired Jordan to create a one-on-one martial arts game similar to the Karate Tournament, although this initial idea didn't last long.
I was thinking about how Karateka got started. Do you remember how you got started?
So I was in college. It was my freshman year, I think, in college.
Yeah.
I probably came home on vacation.
Yeah.
At one point with this new project that was starting, and we were taking karate lessons at the local gym at Chappaqua. I remember that.
You were?
Well, Mom and Emily. And
I
took
remember
some
that your
too.
mother and Emily were doing karate very vigorously.
Yeah, so I took karate lessons too that summer. I didn't get very good at it. I think I was a yellow belt or something like that.
Became a black belt.
Yeah.
So how did you come up with the idea of of the villain and the prince and the princess. Where'd you get that from?
I think it was really Choplifter that gave me the idea that a game could tell a story. And then as to what the story was, since I knew that the gameplay would be a series of karate battles, it was really, I just turned to the Bruce Lee movies.
Bruce Lee. Yeah.
The simplest kind of story. It's always a series of karate battles leading up to the battle with the...
And the drama was when there's a problem and the hero has to solve it. Liberate a princess or...
I was trying to give it human interest.
Yeah. Just wondered what the model for that was.
I mean, Disney was an influence for sure. I'm thinking of films like Snow White or Pinocchio, where you always had this sort of scary villain who would, capture one of the characters. Or The Wizard of Oz, you had the Wicked Witch of the West, you had Dorothy trapped in the witch's castle. With Dorothy even had an hourglass. I'm sure that was part of the inspiration for Prince of Persia.
So then how long did you work on Karateka?
It was a couple of years. Do you remember seeing the first version?
Yeah, sure. Oh yeah. I saw everything.
And you saw it evolve.
I saw it evolve. Yeah, I remember that I remember telling you that there were great props available if you used the Japanese theme. That you could use a Shinto gate and Mount Fuji in the background. Remember that?
Was that your idea?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, sure. Because you didn't know what those things were.
Oh, I mean, we had the prints of the wave breaking on Mount Fuji.
Yes.
We had those books of Hokusai prints and Shiraku prints. And I think you brought those back from a trip you made to Japan in the 60s, right? Because growing up, I mean, we had a Goban.
Yes.
And
I bought back the Go sets and the Goban. But anyway, I remember telling you about the Shinto gate. And then we looked it up. Because I didn't remember exactly what the boards looked like. So we looked it up and found a picture of one in the middle of the water. Remember?
Yeah.
The ocean. I said, that's what it should look like. And you said, okay, and you did it right away.
Yeah, I remember drawing that gate in perspective.
Yeah.
And when it scrolled onto the screen, because it was so big, it slowed down the animation. But it was worth it. And then Mount Fuji was always visible in the background.
Yes.
It was kind of an illusion of animation because you couldn't really do scrolling on the Apple II. But there was this gate that had repeating, a post.
Yes.
So it was really just one, a few bytes of
graphics.
graphics.
Fuji was a static prop.
Right, and the posts were like a mask over it. When they moved, it kind of gave the illusion that the whole camera was scrolling, even though really there was almost nothing on the screen that was animating.
Alright. Karate game. Jordan's Journal, July 7, 1982. Today I didn't do anything on Nerve because my mind was occupied with karate game. After talking it out with his brother David, who was 11 years old at the time, Jordan started sketching out a design for one-on-one fighting game based on the rules of competitive karate, which he so named Karateka. Karateka. Score purple, or you win, or the end green. Your strength, your opponent's strength, mat, you orange, white, your opponent, belt. I worked out with David's advice an awesome system using one joystick and a keyboard to control a karateka, and an elaborate combat system to determine what effect your blows have on your opponent, and vice versa. Karateka development plan. Jordan's original 14-week development plan for the one-on-one version of Karateka dated August 2nd, 1982. He wanted to have it sent off to Brother Brand by Christmas. Yeah, right, he had it. Well, let's read it. Plan for development of Karateka. White Super Shape Maker, right? First week. 2 weeks. What's don't get it. Well, second. design shapes, display strength, this, well, couldn't read it. Animated adventure, August 1992. And as excited as Jordan was about the karate game, he was simultaneously pursuing another bold idea, which he called animated adventure in the summer of 1982. It would have taken the popular graphic adventure game genre and added an animated character controlled with joystick. The breakthrough 94 games King's Quest would eventually be the first to do this. Three typical scenes from animated adventure. Animated Adventure, late 1984. Soon after finishing Karateka in late 1984, Jordan briefly returned to the idea of animated adventure, perhaps inspired by the 1984's release of the point-and-click Macintosh computer. He removed the text parser from the design and replaced it with a series of drop-down menus for character actions, another innovation that our designers would later use to revolutionize the genre. ABS scenes. Soon after Jordan started sketching out Karateka, another project came along to take away his spare time. That November, a local New Haven software company called CompuTeach contracted Jordan to produce an educational game called Alphabet, later ABS Scenes. It was an interactive alphabet book with animated musical scenes for each word. Original design sketches for some of the ABS scenes words with this and improvements of dead bonds. Dead bonds took up a lot of time that Jordan clearly wished he could spend on Karateka. ABS scenes in Spanish. Gator. Gator means cat in Spanish. I know that stuff. He was paid about $3,000 per game, helping to pay for his Yale tuition. After the first 2 weeks of school, things should have died down enough, bio exam, course selection, etc., that I can start work on Alphabet in earnest. Then, with $3,000 under my belt, I'll buy a graphics tablet and get cracking on karate. That game everyone keeps telling me, Dad and Adrian even, is going to be a winner. What if it doesn't work out? What if someone else does it first? Character animation, various sketches and designs, documents of proposed animations for the Karateka hero, likely from different time periods as Jordan continued to evolve and after the game's fundamental design. Attention, bow, cat stance, mid punch, reverse punch, lunge punch, pass front, low side kick, high side kick, middle side kick. As storyline enters the picture, I no longer plan to do it pure karate on the mat. Jordan wrote on January 30, 1983, I've got a scenario. The game would now be a single-player adventure in which a lone karateka invades a villain's hideout and rescues a beautiful maiden. Initially, Jordan envisioned the player deploying on an island by parachute and escaping by helicopter, but the setting quickly moved to an ancient Japan as in this early sketch. Ancient Japan, Karateka. Ooh, fella. Helicopter escape. An early storyboard sequence from this concept. After the hero kills the bad guy, Dr. Nee, he finds and rescues the girl who leads him to the roof of the facility where the helicopter waits, likely inspired by the broadband game Choplifter. Dr. Nee killed. It's her! Hideki are... Well, they hugging each other and then they escape by helicopter. Early mock-up screenshot. This mock screenshot, recovered from Jordan's floppy disk, shows his earliest concept for Karateka. The only possession besides your G is a digital wristwatch. Jordan wrote, once the time hit midnight, the villain would escape with the girl. The only way to end the game is by committing harakiri. In the scene, we see the time and the player character about to commit suicide. Wow, harakiri. I've been working with D-Rex, creating pretty pictures of scenes from the game, making design decisions and trying to get to the perspective right. That was full of comments, advice and ideas on my D-Rexing today. He's very enthusiastic about the project. Pocket watch. Another early Karateka graphic recovered from Jordan's floppy disks shows a pocket watch. The idea would probably have been that the player hit a key on a keyboard to bring up the time display. It's likely that he shifted from a digital wristwatch to an analog pocket watch when he shifted the setting of the game early in time, before abandoning the timer feature entirely. Well, when I'm working, time is so precious. I begrudge every minute I spend away from whatever it is I'm working on. Dead bounce at Christmas, Karateka now. I forget to sleep, to eat, to change clothes. My life gets all fucked up around me through sheer neglect. Karateka in kanji. Jordan didn't know Japanese, so he enlisted someone who did to write the game's title in kanji characters. The Japanese language can be written either horizontally or vertically, as seen here. Well, the kanji version of the word karateka or any Japanese characters whatsoever did not end up in the final game. Jordan apparently did spend what had to be a considerable amount of time designing this kanji version of the logo on the Apple II. Logo sketch, an early sketch of the karateka logo based on the front Libra early storyboard. Another storyboard that is closer to the final version of Karateka. Note the similarities to the final in-game designs, but also the cut features such as the villain's exultant dance after the player is defeated, and the on-screen text mission Rescue Princess, which was likely inspired by a similar message that appears at the beginning of the game Shoplifter, a big influence on Jordan. Early storyboard 2, another more detailed early storyboard. Jordan already wanted the encounter with the princess to have some interactivity, but was still working out what exactly that would be. And this proposed version, if you approach her in fighting stance and punch or kick her, she would fall down and you would lose the game. What? So he's punching right here. The end. Yeah. Mission Rescue Princess. The end. Early stripe sheet. Another image recovered from Jordan's floppy disk in this early attempt at drawing animations for the Karateka character. You might notice something of resemblance between this character and the man in X-ray image in ABS scenes. As you can see, Jordan did not get very far with these hand-drawn animations. Drawing from life. Jordan was set on his karate adventure concept, but drawing realistic human movement was proving difficult. Fortunately, a novel solution was just around the corner. We come into chapter 3, drawing from life. Life on the screen. Now an adventure game, Karateka would use clever animation techniques and cinematic influences to create a game that looked like nothing before it. But Jordan didn't do it alone. Francis Mechner. Oh, that's, I think, the guy sitting with him on the videos. That Jordan's father, Francis, is renowned research psychologist, concert pianist, and chess master. He also made a major contributions for Karateka when his son was having trouble drawing realistic human movement. It was Francis who suggested using the animation technique known as rotoscoping. Dad suggested filming somebody and counting the frames. Mom suggested Dennis, karate instructor, tomorrow evening. I remember the film editing machine we had. Still have Fleischer's rotoscope. Shown here in 1917, patented by pioneering animator Max Fleischer. Rotoscoping involves filming a live actor when then tracing the individual frames to create animated drawings. Jordan pioneered the use of rotoscoping in video games, tracing film stills on vellum paper and digitizing the results on his Apple to create the most lifelike animations ever seen in a computer game. Method of producing moving picture cartoons. Rotoscoping drawing from life. When Jordan began having trouble drawing realistic human sprites freehand, his father Francis suggested he use a technique pioneered by animators in the 1920s known as rotoscoping. What Francis may not have expected is that he would end up being one of the rotoscoped actors.
Working with Jordan was fascinating because he brought in the cinematic side. He obviously was really into movies. He's actually gone off and worked for a bit in the film industry. And the aesthetic and the motion of Karateka, which he continued in Prince of Persia and later in The Last Express, was really unusual for the time, this idea of rotoscoping.
I decided to try a trick early Disney animators had used called rotoscoping. Rotoscoping is basically filming live actors doing the moves that you want to animate and then literally tracing each frame to get a frame of animation. At first I started to try to do the animation the usual way by drawing characters on graph paper. And then, because it was pixel by pixel at that time that we had to do the animations. But when I tried it, it just looked stiff. And I think you were the one who had the idea of filming the movements and then counting the number of frames.
I suggested, when I saw you struggling with these pixels, I suggested that we just make a video.
Well, not video. This was 1982.
A Super 8, a Super 8 of somebody actually making those movements. I thought, I didn't remember that.
And you were actually a model at one point because I started by filming our karate teacher, Dennis, doing the punches and the kicks, advancing and retreating. But then later on, I realized that the character would need to run, like that it was too slow to move in that karate stance throughout the entire palace. So I needed someone running. And so you put on a karate outfit and we went out into the woods in front of the house in Chappaqua. And I filmed you running in Super 8. And also the climbing up onto the cliff at the beginning of the game, that was you. Climbing up onto the hood of the car. In the carport.
I've forgotten that.
We're wearing, I guess, I don't know if it was my karate suit or...
Mom's probably.
Yeah, you were probably wearing Mom's gi.
Yeah.
And you had never taken karate lessons, but you did the running. Yeah, so what I did was I put that Super 8 roll of film on the Moviola, which was it was a screen with rear projection, and you could turn the crank and stop on a particular frame, and then I would put a piece of tracing paper, I would scotch tape it to the screen and trace the outline of the character with a pencil, and then wind it a couple of frames ahead, and then do the same thing. So I ended up with all these little sheets of tracing paper with outlines.
That was a breakthrough, actually, in video game technology, because nobody had done that before you.
I mean, it really goes all the way back to silent film. I mean, I found out later that the early animators had done this. In Snow White, Disney's animators had actually, not for the dwarfs and the animals, but for Snow White and the prince, the more human characters.
It's kind of an obvious idea because everybody knows that real live movements are totally different from what a cartoonist would draw. I mean, there are very subtle rhythms and speed changes that define a human movement, a movement of a live organism as opposed to the movement of an imagined organism.
Well, and also there's so many complexities, there's things that you wouldn't imagine, like the way that you kind of throw an arm awkwardly over one shoulder to compensate for the change in balance.
Correct.
It's like when you see it, it looks natural, but if you're just trying to reconstruct in your head what someone does, for example, when they turn around while running, you wouldn't think of that.
And also we make adjustments of the angle at which we hold the body depending on the speed with which we're moving so that we don't tilt over.
Yeah.
And those adjustments are very critical to the realism of of the movement.
Yeah, in Karateka it's very subtle, but there's a
Yeah.
low kick, a middle kick, and a high kick.
I know.
And I remember in the frame of the high kick, the fighter leans back,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
also the arm goes back, and that's something. It's.
Yeah, yeah.
I remember that because I had to, draw that frame and use it so many times. For 2 years I was staring at that frame, but in the beginning when I tried to do a frame of a high kick, it was more like idealized.
Yeah.
Didn't realize that the body would have to lean quite that far
That's
back.
fascinating.
This took a very long time. It was an incredibly laborious process. It took me months to go through all these steps just to get to the point of doing the first animation test. But I can still remember the thrill that I felt on seeing that little figure moving across the screen. It was the illusion of life. It was everything I'd hoped for.
Alright, Tracing Paper Session 1. On March 15, 1983, Jordan filmed his mother's karate teacher, Dennis Holliday, performing various attacks, stances, and other maneuvers using an older film editing device called a Moviola. Jordan was able to display a single frame of Super 8 footage on the wall of his dorm room and use tracing paper to trace outline of the subject. This film has been lost, but the tracings that Jordan made still remain. The sensei, Dennis Holliday, on the left of the Triangle Way, Sankaku-do Karate Dojo in Yorktown Heights, New York, served as a rotoscope model for all the martial arts moves in karateka. Block, bow, chamber, crane, down, fall, nice, fight, fighting machine guard, jab, kick, punch, run, stand, step, turn, on punch, walk, and backwards, towards and backwards. Well, Jordan's process. In these panels from Replay, an upcoming autobiographical memoir for Second Books 2024, Jordan illustrates his process for tracing sprites from the Super 8 film frames. That summer I filmed my mom's karate t-shirt with a Super 8 camera and traced the footage frame by frame to create a rotoscoped animation. Finally sprites. Jordan bought a device called VersaWriter, which was a tablet with an electronic arm that would read the movements of a stylus and translate them into computer graphics. In this way he was able to turn the art on the tracing paper into crude sprites. He then cleaned them up in DREX, a drawing program he wrote to create these sequences. VersaWriter. In the days before scanners and digital cameras, a device called the VersaWriter let computer users digitize their artwork. After placing a sketch on a tablet, they traced the lines with the stylus, which was attached to an articulated arm. Ken and Roberta Williams used the VersaWriter for the first graphic adventure game Mystery House, and Jordan used it for Karateka to turn his straight frames into sprites. VersaWriter. In this panel from his upcoming graphic memoir Replay, Jordan recreates the process of using VersaWriter to digitize his miniature rotoscope sketches. Alright. Jordan Journals. March 22, 1983. I was afraid that tinkering with the trace outlines would distort the animation, make it look all wrong again, that this whole technology might be fatally flawed. But it worked beautifully. Editing the images with DREX not only didn't ruin the lifelike effect, it made it better. The little guy now looks even more like a little guy than he did when he was fresh from Verse Rider Storyboard July 11, 1983. A storyboard from around this time period shows the planned scope of the full game, one level finishing with a confrontation with the villain. A game over scene would show the villain raising his arms in victory. Dojo mode. For much of Karateka's development, Jordan wanted to implement a dojo mode where the player could train by hitting a punching bag in a hero's home dojo away from the enemies. He got as far as creating this scene in D-Rex. The game's controls got much simpler as development progressed, which probably lessened the need for a practice mode. Why cannot? Okay. My numlock just turned off. August 2nd, 1983. Read an article in the Times about Dragon Slayer, the new video disc arcade game with animation by Don Bluth. I've gotta see it. In a way, it was kind of depressing to read because it's like my dream is coming true and I'm missing it. By the time I get there, it'll be all over. Jordan's Karateka schedule, 1983. In addition to keeping a journal of his daily activities, Jordan also kept a chart showing the number of hours each day he worked on Karateka. The third column on certain pages cuts shows the Yale classes that he skipped the day to work on the game. He often cut ASP or social psychology, but rarely missed L, aka literature, film studies. Falling off the cliff. If the first guard pushes the player back too far, or if the player simply pushes. Wait. Somebody calling me. Wait a minute. Or if the player simply pushes left instead of right. Just a moment. Alright. Since 1983, these are not screenshots of a prototype, but since that Jordan doing D-Rex as a part of the process of working out the game's design. Take note of the various features that didn't make the cut, such as the mission rescue princess text, the timer and the map at the top of the screen, showing your progress and location of the next guard. Karateka. It's way too hot today. Almost September, 36 degrees. Bird combat. On January 2nd, 1984, Jordan and his father came up with the game's final major mechanic, the villain's attack bird. This solved the design problem. The player didn't need to be particularly cautious as they made their way from guard to guard. The possibility of a random bird attack meant to the player that he had to be more vigilant. Whoa. Dad and I realized the game lacks two important elements: conflict of interest and vigilance, so we came up with a solution: the villain's pet vulture, which attacks you every now and then when you're between the guards. You need to be in a fighting stance when it comes on screen and punch or kick to the correct height to repel its attack. If you run in a stance, you'll get clobbered and lose a lot of hit points. Rotoscope Session 2. On January 7, 1984, Jordan and his family filmed the second and final rotoscoping session for Karateka. Every step in this process has been preserved, so we can see the entire journey from the film to tracing paper to rough sprites to clean in-game visuals. Super 8 film footage. The complete Super 8 film footage from the second rotoscoping session. Francis Mechner played the hero, dressed in his wife's karate gi. Jordan's sister Emily played the princess, and Jordan himself played the villain Akuma. There is no sound, so they're just men running. His father in the forest. They have video camera in that time. I mean, nice. Very nice. Should I pass it forward? Climbing up the car. That's Jordan himself, I guess. Sorry. Mom. Looks beautiful in that skirt. I mean, that dress. She played the princess. Nice. Guys are in love. Ah, that's Jordan. Ooh. But there's a cute black cat. What's that stuff? Some extra. The run. Although he had already filmed a walking animation with his karate teacher, Jordan had belatedly realized that the hero would also need to run, since walking was too slow a method of reaching the palace. Francis Mechner ran around the woods behind the family home to capture these frames. Yeah, we saw that. Tracing paper run. The frames of run animation that resulted from the film session with Francis on tracing paper. Climbing the cliff. To capture the frames of the hero climbing over the top of the cliff at the beginning of the game, Francis donned his wife's karate gi and climbed on the top of the family car outside their home in Chappaqua, New York. That's tracing paper. Rotoscope feeder. See how Jordan transferred film frames to tracing paper with this interactive rotoscope viewer. Sketch layer, run animation. Digitized sprites. This image, recovered from one of Jordan's floppy disks, represents the first stage in the rotoscoping process. These sprites are the result of Jordan filming his father tracing the frames on paper and then converting those traced images into Apple II pixels using the Versa writer. Rough animation. Even before being cleaned up, the rough output from the Versa writer results in realistic run animation. I had no idea what it would look like, Jordan said, the first time he tested the Versa writer's output. When I saw that sketchy little figure walk across the screen, all I could say was, alright. Well, alright. Rotoscope filter. Compare the tracing paper to the Versa writer output using this interactive rotoscope viewer. Clean up runner. The run animation after Jordan cleaned up the sprites. Once he drew the hero's white gi of the character, some sections of the sprites became identical since there was no way to tell, for example, which leg was in front. This looked fine on screen and allowed Jordan to delete the identical section of the sprites to save disk space. Digitized climber. The final opening sequence before the game begins shows the hero finishing his accent up the cliffside. This was created from frames of Princess Magna climbing up onto the hood of the family car. This image shows Jordan's cleanup in process, not quite the original digitized frame, but not quite the final version. The cliff sequence. They cleaned up series of frames of the cliff climbing sequence. Rotoscope Fear compile full stage of Karateka sprite production, film frames, tracing paper, rough sprites, and final sprites using this interactive rotoscope viewer. Final sprite. More sprite sheets. Additional animation sprites recovered from Jordan's floppy disks, including the bird and the explosion when it dies. The comic book style starbursts that show players when a hit has connected, and the final or near final animations derived from the film of Francis. Cross-cutting. In addition to rotoscoped animation, another cinematic technique introduced to Karateka was cross-cutting. Swapping the camera back and forth between the player and the approaching enemy. This gave the game a heightened sense of film-like action. Well, from his journal. In a brainstorming session with Dad, I got many good ideas. The most important is add footstep sounds for you and the guards. Keep cross-cutting between the two of you. If you stop running, it cuts back to the guard trying toward you. Tension. The villain, originally named Kratank and renamed by Brother Band to Akuma maybe, or Demon. The main villain needed to be an imposing presence. While he had to be the same height as a hero, his puffy sleeves and oversized robe loomed larger than life on the screen. Kratank. Jordan brainstorms the villain's name and works on the text of the game's opening crawl. Fear and selfishness behind you. Death is a possible outcome, and fix your intention on your purpose. This is a way of Karateka. Mortan, Morvu, Voltur, Kandor, Krogan, War, Ken, Zor, Mordor, Dread, Vader, Wotan, Morgan, Morsen, Boo, Kratank. Jordan the villain. Joining himself, don the crimson bathrobe, played the role of Kratank Akuma in the January 94 Super 8 film. Since no matching tracing paper was found for these frames, it is possible that Jordan simply used these frames as a reference when drawing the sprites, both the body movement and the movement of the loose hand and cloth. Villain sprites, whereas Akuma sprites recovered from Jordan's floppy disk, both fused and unused. Scenario dealing with princess. After a hard-fought game of Karateka, simply reaching the princess, originally Tiger Lily, later Mariko, was no guarantee of success. In Jordan's original design, which you can play in his original prototype, the player had to bow to the princess before she would extend her arms to embrace him. Otherwise, she'd heal him in a single bow. Princess sprites. Trade embrace. That's nice. In the final game, if you approach the princess while in your fighting stance, she will take this as a threat and attack and kill you with a single blow. You have to approach in your non-violent walking stance to complete the story. Princess fighting. More D-Rex scenes. More early scenes that Jordan created in D-Rex as he put the game together. Note that this used the solid life bars, not the arrows, which were added later after Jordan signed it with the Brother Band. Kicking. Nice. Francis Magner music. Jordan was not a musician, but his father was. Francis, who composed the music, suggested the use of leitmotif short musical phrases tied to individual characters or ideas. This is not only provided Karateka with a played musical interludes but helped reinforce the beats of its story. Francis explains Karateka's music in this exhaustive 7-page document intended to be referenced by the designers who are porting Karateka to other computer platforms. Francis himself gives us in-depth explanation of the craft and the meaning behind his musical score.
Well, this is the apartment where we made the music 35 years ago, right?
Right. And I sat right here.
Right. It was.
And you sat. Where did you sit? There or here?
Well, I don't remember. It's been 35
but
years.
But you had your laptop.
It wasn't a
It
laptop.
wasn't a laptop.
Yeah.
It was a computer. What was it? An Apple.
It was an Apple II computer.
The music that was there just in the Apple II was fantastic, and it just sort of like gave you a sense of, you know, like sort of a score, you know, happening during your game, and it was one of the most impactful as far as just remembering it as a total experience of a game that I've had in a long time.
I remember with Karateka the music, and there wasn't a whole lot of it in the game, but there were a few, you know, tunes that played at key moments, and I remember the opening music had a big impact. And it was interesting with the Apple IIc because it was a single unit and there was a speaker built into it. And so when you put your hands on the keyboard, if you had the volume really loud, you can feel the vibration of the music being played through the speaker. And Karateka, for some reason, I remember that opening tune. I haven't heard it in I don't know how long, but I'm sure if I heard it, I would recognize it immediately. But I just remember the music having a big deal.
I knew from early Disney animation and silent movies how important music was to tell a story and make it emotional. But I wasn't a musician. So I turned to my dad. He was a businessman, not a professional musician, but he was a really good classical pianist.
Yeah, that's what I grew up hearing. So Karateka was your first composing job.
Yeah.
And not all games had music at that time. It was, I mean, technically it was difficult to get music into the game because the Apple II processor could only do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So anytime we played music, the action on the screen had to freeze. For example, we couldn't play the music while the princess was walking.
Right.
So we had to design it in such a way that like the characters would pause, then we would play a little bit of music, then we could animate. But it was worth it because the music added drama.
Even the idea of using music in a video game was novel at that time. I even observed to you that none of these games use music. They have clicks, and they have loud clicks and soft clicks, and sometimes they had beeps, but they never had music.
Yeah, that's right. On the Apple, it had a speaker that could only do beeps.
We had that conversation. Can these beeps be turned into music? And then you explained to me that every beep had a range of frequencies and could be tuned to any particular frequency. So I said, well, why not have a series of beeps that are tuned to notes?
Yeah.
And then you have music.
Of course, when he agreed to compose the music for Karateka, I'm not sure he really understood just how severe the technical limitations of the Apple II were. This was before sound cards.
There is one memory location that if you accessed it, it would go. And that's what you had to make sound with. That's how you made sound effects. That's how you made music. You just did that faster or slower.
He'd write out the themes for Mariko and the hero and Akuma on sheet music, and I'd calculate the hexadecimal note values and type them into the computer. I remember playing the music back for him, and he'd say, well, this note here is it's a little bit sharp, and I'd bring it down one, and he'd say, well, now it's a half tone too flat, and so I'd bring it up one, and then he'd say, well, now it's a quarter tone sharp, and I'd say, Dad, this is a computer. It's a number from 0 to 255. There's nothing in between.
I was trying to remember, how did we talk about what kind of music to write? You know, were there any?
Oh, I immediately said that you need a leitmotif, of course. That was a no-brainer. I mean, that was clear right away.
He suggested using Wagner's leitmotif approach, also used in movies like Star Wars, in which each character is represented by a musical theme.
Yeah.
So I thought, I was thinking of the Siegfried motif in Wagner's Götterdämmerung series. You know, the Siegfried opera has a leitmotif for Siegfried, who is a hero, you know, sort of an admirable figure. And I wanted that for your hero in Karateka. So I was thinking that the Siegfried motif goes something like this. It goes. And then continue. Like that.
Yeah.
So it was too long. It had to be short for Karateka. So I tried to abbreviate it. Like that.
Yeah, except that I couldn't play notes simultaneously.
Yeah, but like that. So that's sort of a takeoff on the Siegfried theme.
It always sounded great when you played it on the piano, but then when I translated it to the Apple II,
Well,
it was.
it sounded pretty good, actually. And then we did the Akuma theme. It has to be sort of a menacing.
Yeah, making you play this for the first time in 35 years.
And then the danger theme, which is sort of related to Akuma. So we used this.
I mean, that sounds like Wagner to me too. Was that inspired by Hunding's theme and
Yeah,
Die Walküre?
exactly. The Hunding theme, right. I forgot that. And then the princess is.
I thought the music was played at the right moments. Like it was all set up very dramatically, you know, to play on the story that I think was being implied. And, you know, to me, it sort of was a precursor to all the stuff that came later.
But yeah, for Karateka, we had the hero's theme and then the villain Akuma's theme and then the princess's theme.
Right.
Just very strong flavors.
Yeah, but you know what you're reminding me of is how new that idea was at that time. You know, the very idea, the very possibility of having music in a video game, where there are no notes available, where you can only have one beat at a time. It's not obvious that can be turned into music. You know.
And it was important for creating the mood. When you have characters who are 40 pixels high, you don't have camera angles, you don't have lighting, but you want to show that this one is the villain, and you know, this one is the princess in distress. You know, the music, just like, even if it's just a few notes and you don't really have orchestration, it tells you right away who's who.
So it's amazing what we accomplished with that. You know, really.
Alright, the music of Karateka, an audio journey. Karateka's groundbreaking musical score made extensive use of the concept of leitmotif, often used to great effect in opera and film. In this 15-minute audio experience, host and musician Kirk Hamilton breaks down Karateka's unique musical soundscape, helping us more deeply appreciate its subtle genius.
The music there's like the very strong, but this look at it and make your way over the core characters, the motif, all flow general. You can see a really one of the very Chopin's of the developments. Commonly as in front of you on TV.
Let's
Kind of
listen
this
at
sense
the
and
end. Karateka's Jordan's original, dating to May 1st, 1984. This is the version of Karateka that Jordan submitted to publishers. It is much shorter and simpler than the final game, among other key differences. Well, you can play it. Jordan's prototype instructions. When you're standing up, push joystick to the right to run forward. Let's try. Copyright 94 Jordan Making of Karateka by Jordan. High atop a craggy cliff, guarded by an army of fierce warriors, stands the fortress of the evil warlord Karateka. In the darkest dungeon of the palace, Karateka himself stands guard over his prisoner, the beautiful princess Tiger Lily. You are Karateka, one trained in the art of karate, alone and unarmed. You must defeat Karateka and win heart of Tiger Lily. Put fear and selfishness behind you. Focus your will on your objective. Accepting death as a possibility. This is the way of the Karateka. For real. Well. What are the controls? I wonder. Retreat. Left start. Space. Kick. Punch ball. Left control. So here we go. The princess and the Karateka. Running. I fell, man. The end. Now the game over. We'll have to punch him. I try. Let's try it again once again. Okay, so we start. That's a ball, right? No. How to punch him? Ah, I should to make a fight stance. Ooh, nice. That was a kick. Boom. High kick. Nice. Mawashigiri. Yokogiri. For real, now we're fighting the boss. Ah, no, he sent another. Here we go. Started to like this game. So we have to be in the fight stance. We have to activate by pressing down. He's still running. I'm waiting for you, baby. Oh, that's a bird. By the way, I'm recovering health. Let's start with a high kick. Some punch. Ooh. Ah. Second is done. There's an eagle. Send to the another one. That's the third one. Should I recover? Hey, get out. He's running. Nice. Able to Kick that bird out. Don't come closer. Nice punch. Are they unlimited or have to run to his lair? I'm almost dead. And I hear the bird coming. Come on. Alright. Well, I'm done. Well, it was a nice experience. I did feel 3 of them. Anyway, level 2 and 3 design documents. Brother Bond signed Karateka on the condition that Jordan come to its headquarters in San Rafael, California and work with its team on finishing the game. Feeling that the game was too short, Brother Bond Brass wanted 2 more levels. These design documents sketch out the beginning of the production on what would become the final retail Karateka. At problems, level 1, repetitive dispatch, eagle guard, over and over, too long, too hard, it's all there is. Add 2 more levels after level 1. Level 2, first guard is last guard of the second series. Level 3 downstairs. Puzzles. Add 2 puzzles. First at the end of level 1. One at the end of level 1, one at the end of level 2. Puzzle should come up afterwards. Seems like last guard. What? During a plateau, player can rest. The tree. Jordan had tried various ways of showing the player how far they progress in their journey towards the castle. The final attempt at this, the idea of having a tree that would slowly scroll in the background. The addition of the tree was part of the planned expansion of Karateka after the broadband contract was signed, but never came to a fruition. Level 2 and 3 scenes. Broadband's Rubber Room. While many of the games Broadband published were created by independent developers, Broadband's in-house staff helped polish them until they were ready for release. Former Broadband CEO Doug Carlson and designer Lauren Elliott discussed the process. That was 1984.
We probably had, in a 3-year period, 7 or 8 games that got in the top 10 on the bestseller charts. Choplifter was certainly one. I think Lode Runner was another. Apple Galaxy and Alien Rain was 2. Snoggle was. I suspect there were a few others. I was always worried that there was going to be a dip in the number of really good submissions, and that if we didn't work harder to bring them in, we were going to find it very hard to grow. It was our effort to build an internal group that gave us some stability and also some quantity of submissions. We decided that because we're having so much trouble getting engineers to come up with great ideas, that maybe we should separate the two. The fact that you can code doesn't mean that you can be effective in thinking of what to code. And some of our very best coders would complain to me they never had a creative idea in their lives. Somebody had to tell them what to do. So Gene and Lauren were brought in to do exactly that.
I was an architect. I was moved to Sonoma County as an architect, and I had begun playing some of the games. At one point, I just drew up a number of games that I thought would be fun, and I just drove down to San Rafael and walked in the front door with no introduction and talked to the brothers, talked to Doug and Gary Carlson. Over one lunch, they looked at the drawings and said if I could convince the programmers to do some games for the drawings I had, I was welcome to join. And that was the end of that. I just walked in, and I had to find my own desk and find a computer and do everything else. I just wandered around. In fact, it was a liquor warehouse in San Rafael, and Gene was stuck in an airless room with a door. I don't know what they stored in there. But I just wandered around. There was a desk in there, and I wandered in and asked if it was okay if I sat there. And he said, sure. And we started working together from that day on, but it was pure happenstance.
Gene had worked for Imagineering down at Disney. He said he'd done 5,000 illustrations of Jiminy Cricket and so on.
He worked back in an era when they drew the cells one at a time, right? Hand-drawn every animation cell. So he really knew that industry, and he knew Disney spent a lot of time getting the idea of a character, the sense of a character, obviously, in the movies. And that was something that the software industry did not have. It really did not have. But one of the first things that a couple of games we first worked on together, Choplifter, which was a Dan Gorland's game, Gene would always stress that you had to get a sense of the figure, but Gene spent his time talking to everybody about how you could draw that character and just give him enough animation to make sense that he was alive, that he was a real character and would walk across, get impatient and walk across the screen, or get pissed off and leave the screen or whatever. And he started doing that even before Jordan got there. But we worked on a number of things so that's what his sense was. His sense was bringing life, bringing a real character, bringing a real, real stories to the characters. They would throw them in what became known as the rubber room. They would throw them in the room with Gene and myself, and we just BS about the game, add things if we wanted to. It was all at the designers like Jordan's. It was at his, he made all the decisions on it, but we would spent a lot of time on drawing things and talking about animation and everything else. But yes, I generally knew, all internal games and external ones that they eventually published came through the rubber room at some point.
Okay, so let me ask you something. It's because from high school through college, basically, I was making these games, and I had the ambition of making a game that would be good enough to get published.
Right.
But that never really happened. It didn't happen with Asteroids. It didn't happen with Death Bounce. And then Karateka was the one that finally did. So I sent Berterbund Karateka on floppy disk, and they said, "This is great. We want to publish it."
It was essentially a finished game. At least it had all the pieces together. I think he wanted to keep the whole thing under wraps and see if he could get it exactly right without any nudging or criticism or whatever. And I have no idea whether he was that self-confident or that unself-confident. I don't know whether he was doing that because he was sure he could do it all on his own, or whether he didn't want to get another refusal.
Yeah, I went to Berterbund in 1984, the summer between my junior and senior years. At that time, I'd mostly finished Karateka. I'd sent it to Berterbund on a floppy disk. They'd said they wanted to publish it, but that they wanted me to do some more work on it. And they actually flew me out there for the summer to add a second and a third level.
Right.
Well, we knew it was going to be publishable. There was enough there to know that even if it needed lengthening or a little more of an experience for the player, there wasn't any doubt that it was going to be publishable.
I remember, because we used to have pitch days, I remember seeing it then. I remember when it was brought in, because a lot of times they would bring things in, and I think we would, on Friday afternoons, ideas would come in and everybody take a look at them. And I know Gene was enthralled with just the animation part of it, but Jordan had a real a real interest in movies. I mean, and had taken a lot of inspiration from that. And he and Gene were very similar in that, right? They were both hardcore kind of movie people, and Gene knew all of the movies that Jordan would ever talk about. So I think they shared a real sense of it was automatic. It was really easy for them, a real sense of the storytelling. But anyway, doing all the filming and then having rotoscoping, having it drawn. And Gene, of course, had spent 20 years doing that, right? Effectively, just doing it by hand. And so he could tell, he could talk about the frames you could skip, how to exaggerate, how to take the rotoscoping, but exaggerate it a bit. Don't do it literally there, all the falls and all the lunges and all that stuff. Okay, just tweak that a bit, just because it's an emotional experience rather than just a cinematic one entirely. So those were real easy conversations to have. So those two, I think, had a good time talking about it. But I was learning how to draw all that stuff and do the animation with Gene on it, and he was a great teacher on it. I tended to be more precise, and Gene tended to be more exaggerated. He tended to have lots of, land and squish kind of things, where balloons would, how they land and flow out. So the leopard was easy, I think, probably because I was more exact about it. Yeah. And the idea that you could actually get one of these things in a game was just wonderful, because I didn't get that much of a chance to do that. I think Gene would probably start with the sketch and I would look at it, and then you just did it pixel by pixel. That's all there was to it. There weren't any fancy big monitors. There wasn't a whole lot of previewing all the frames at different speeds or anything like that. So from a sketch, draw it very carefully by hand, and then repeat the process. It's just a very tedious, slow, pixel at a time process. But fun. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Alright, bouncing off the walls. When the programmer submitted the game to a Broderbund, they would usually work with a publisher in-house creative team, Gene Portwood and Lauren Elliott, who would help polish up the ideas, impression, quality, animation, and additional features. This article from the winter 1986 edition of Broderbund's company newsletter explains how the inhabitants of the Rubber Room helped bring game concepts to their final polished states. Gene Raymond Eugene Gene Portwood Jr. joined Disney as an animator in 1950, working on Sleeping Beauty, Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp. He joined the Broderbund team in 1980, working on various game projects including Karateka. He co-created Wayne World's Carmen Sandiego. I played that stuff with Lauren Elliott in 1987. Portwood passed away at 66 years old on July 17. Lauren Elliott joining Broderbund in 1983. Lauren Elliott teamed up with Gene Portwood to form the company's co-creative alliance. He co-created Carmen Sandiego with Portwood. Later, the two left from Elliott Portwood Production, a game design studio. Karateka Prototype 2. Broderbund wanted Jordan to add more levels to Karateka. This work in progress version from around July 1944 has unfinished version of level 2 and no ending sequence. It also features an experimental title screen that combined the castle artwork with the logo. Well, let's just play. Just watch it. Start playing. That's the title screen. Already played our stuff. Oh, he's sending another warriors. That's we inside. There are too many of them. Some cage bars. Is that level 2 or what? Those are some bars. 7 minutes. Akuma's Castle. Disney animator Gene drew the exterior shot of Akuma's Castle, at first based on Japan's largest castle, Himeji, which sits on a hilltop in Kyoto. In later revisions, it became more stylized and sinister. Karateka. Text and titles. Rise and progress takes on the Karateka title screen, opening titles and other text-based work recovered from Jordan's floppy disks. Karate. The Big Cat. Gene Portwood and Lauren Elliott added a great deal of polish to Karateka's opening sequences, but their biggest idea didn't make it into the final game. Akuma's Pet Cat, alternately referred to as either a panther or a leopard. Elliott did a great deal of animation for this cat character, showing it running, eating and dying. Good luck in the 6th 16th grade, and not from Jim to Jordan with an idea of how the cat might be implemented into the game design. The note is undated, but it's likely from September 1984, after Jordan had returned from his summer at Broderbund and started his senior year at Yale. From the director, subject of thought: we now have the leopard back in a dungeon with the Princess Wanda, without Princess Wanda into the... You could use the same shapes. I couldn't read it. The cat shows down. The cat pursues you. Karateka Prototype 3, a new final prototype of Karateka from August 1994. The opening and ending scenes of this version are not polished. The final version is a finished game, but it can be played all the way through. Let's watch it. So here's the opening scene, right? They'll hear running, sending the boys. Oh, that's level 3 bird combat. Oh, is that the boss? Ugh. Last hit left. Empty room. Oh, come to me. The final kiss. And so this adventure ends. The evil Akuma vanished. The beautiful Mariko safe in your arms. For the first time memory, the village basks in the sunlight of peace. But beware, for the true karateka there is always the next time. Testing results. Karateka retail version, the final version of Karateka for the Apple II. Action strategy, a suspenseful movie-like story, smoothly animated characters, scrolling backgrounds, realistic karate fighting. Returning home after years of study under the master of karate, you find your village burned to the ground. Your friends and family are scattered. Your bread to be stolen by Akuma, the warlord. Those oppressive shadow has darkened your village since before you were born. Your grief and rage turn to cold determination. You vow never again to submit to the evil warlord. You know you must avenge your village and rescue your beloved Princess Mariko from Akuma's mountain fortress. Alone, armed only with your knowledge of karate, you must outfight Akuma's vicious warriors, each one more powerful than the last. Fight on, deep into the heart of the palace. Whether to rescue Mariko, you must confront the cruel Akuma himself in hand-to-hand combat. Put fear and self-concern behind you. Focus your will on your objective, accepting death as a possibility, and do what you have chosen to do. This is the way of the Karateka. Apple II disc. You can play it or watch it real quick. Just jump by chapters. Ending. Alright, we're moving forward. But no champagne. Video games didn't have specific release dates at the time. But Karateka for the Apple II was widely available by December 1984. Broderbund sent Jordan a faint copy of the box art, accompanied by this letter to celebrate his accomplishment. Everyone was confident about Karateka's potential in the market. All that remained was to see how it sold. Dear Jordan, congratulations if somewhat belatedly on the release of Karateka. Enclosed, as you've probably noticed by now, is a framed copy of the box art in honor of your efforts. Normally we would like to present this alone with champagne toast, but since you're not local, I hope you'll accept this less personal presentation. And let me owe you the toast. Congratulations again and best wishes for the new year. Get my first royalty statement from Brotherbunt. They sold one copy in November at $32.95. I hope business picks up in December. Graduation. As Jordan was wrapping up his year education, Karateka was about to be sent out into the world. It would be every bit the success that Jordan had hoped for. Well, chapter 4. Marketing a masterpiece. Having a finished game was just the beginning. The next step was Brotherbunt to figure out how to sell this truly unique experience. What's in a name? Although Jordan called the project Karateka from its earliest inception, he often considered changing the name to more marketable. It needs a new title. People think it's Caretaker, he wrote in September 1984. In this undated document, he brainstorms other names from the prosaic Karate Man to the downright strange Zarfas. Let's take a look. Karate Rescue, Karate Attack, Karate Man, Kung Fu Man, Ektarak, Etarak, Zarfos, Zarax. Pronounced in Karateka. Karateka from the Japanese word meaning a practitioner of karate was a familiar word in the United States in 1984, and many fans of the game ended up pronouncing it differently. Jordan says the record straight in this bonus clip.
Karateka.
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 Karateka?
Karateka.
Karateka, Karateka.
Karateka, and if it's Karateka, I've never heard that before. So maybe Jordan says it that way. I don't know, but I know we all said Karateka at the company.
I think when I was a kid, I always said Karateka, because it's like you say karate and you just add the ka.
Let's talk about pronunciation. So here's the thing. In the 80s, TV didn't talk about games, and we didn't have the internet, so pretty much everybody pronounced the title of the game in their own way. A lot of people say Karateka or Karateka. In Japanese, there's no stress on any syllable, so it would be Karateka, something like that. I called it Karateka, but I've since found out that pretty much everybody pronounced it differently. So however you pronounce it is fine. Don't feel bad. It's all good.
Karateka. Black Belt logo. By January 1984, Jordan had resolved to call the game Black Belt, but soon found out that another game had already taken the title, so back to Karateka it was. Black Belt. Box art concept 1. This sketch from Jordan's papers appears to be a copy of different box art concept, possibly by Gene Portwood. The notes indicate that the princess should resemble an American blonde, the hero of young Chuck Norris or Luke Skywalker, while the villain, still called Kratan here, should be Japanese. Alternate box art concept. Another box concept of unknown origin again compares the game's three main characters to Star Wars. Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, early box sketch. And another box sketch. Box art final illustration. That looks nice, I mean. And the princess looks beautiful. Box copy revisions. The crafting of the copy of the back of Karateka's box was a three-way dance between Jordan Broadband and an outside advertising agency. Jordan felt that the agency's box copy was terrible, but office politics meant that Broadband often deferred to the agency's judgment. Jordan rewrote much of the copy himself, and the parties eventually landed on a compromise. Instruction manual drafts. The instruction manual also went through the revisions, although these were simply between Jordan and Broadband. Here's Broadband's original draft followed by Jordan's revision. Karateka. Karateka. Press release October 15, 1984. Broadband announced Karateka to the world on October 15, 1984, calling it the first of a new genre of computer games, an action game with a storyline, characters, and remarkably realistic sound and animation. Karateka will be available for the Apple II, minimum 48K memory. At the Commodore 64 suggests retail prices $34. A game unlike any other. An early sell sheet for Karateka intended to get retailers excited about stocking in their stores. Karateka is action strategy at its very best with realistic karate fighting. Commodore 64, $29. Fan letter. After the release of Karateka, Jordan began to receive fan letters, one which praised his programming prowess on Apple II came from a young game designer named John Romero, who would go on to found ID Software and create games such as Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Yeah, Wolfenstein is a great one. Greetings, Earthlink. Hello, let me introduce myself. My name is John Romero and I currently live in Knightonworth, England. I'm American stationed here with my family. I'm not a I just go to school here. I'm 17 going on 18 in October 28th. I'm writing because I played your game Karateka. Actually, I have the game. I'm writing because you need to be congratulated on this game. I was absolutely stunned by the graphics, shadows and all. You did a tremendous job and have, I think, defined the state of the art for the future Apple games. The technology has been in Apple all along to do those graphics. You just need a programmer like you to use it. Now I must betray myself. I'm a programmer, albeit an unknown one. From what I saw on the screen, I deduced most of the technique used in drawing the graphics. Here are my conclusions. You had to use page flipping. Second, shapes were altered on the screen. First with the mask, then the shape. Third, for the parts where the Karateka went halfway through a door, you adjusted the horizontal drawing ranges. Fourth, for the scrolling background, you tell me. For the music, I would like to know if you use the music construction set. I have finished the game many times and I keep coming back for more of that excellent music. Did you make up that song or what? If you made it up, you must be some musician. All in all, your game is absolutely amazing. I have studied Broderbund games and they all have non-flickering animation and excellent demos. I have made tons of games, but until recently I haven't used any advanced animation techniques like page flipping or animation. Now that I know how good those techniques look, I'm starting to use them. The page flipping requires a tremendous amount of work. I'm also thanking you for redefining my methods of animation. Ever since Karateka, my graphic outlook has changed. I have created new drawing routines and page flipping algorithms. If you would like to see my latest work of art deprived of advanced animation techniques but still good with EOR drawing, just write back and ask me. Be sure to include your address. The game is called the Pyramids of Egypt. Many people feel that it is better than Lode Runner, and almost everybody yells out Tutankhamen when they first see it. It works with a keyboard and joystick, and you can define your keys. There are 100 levels, and I'm planning on making 100 level expansion discs. Anyway, ask me for it, and it's yours. I'm currently trying to sell it to anyone I can. Broadband is first on my list. My next game is going to be totally awesome, using the page flipping technique, of course. I can't wait until I get an idea for my next game. Another thing I wanted to ask you was, how did you make the scrolling background? Ever since Shoplifter, I have been stuck on what kind of data and drawing algorithm would be used to draw scrolling backgrounds like yours. Oh sure, I know how to make the copy 1 byte movement backgrounds, but not your 2 pixel movement background. If you decide to write back, I would be eternally grateful if you explain this to me. And if you would like to see some of my older crummier games, look no farther than the June 1984 issue of in Serial Magazine Scout Search, and the future June 1985 issue Snag, and another issue that they haven't told me about yet, Bongo's Bash. Also look at A Plus Magazine December 1984 for my award-winning Cavern Crusader game. Yes, I have made some printable material, but I still haven't broken into the big league yet. Just wait until my next game. Sincerely, John Romero, disciple of the great Jordan and worshipper the magnificent Mechner. How's that sound? Karateka, the Wrath of the Duped. Some players took their love of Karateka even further. An official fan project created in 1985 by Eric Newman, Karateka 2, The Wrath of Dude, was an animation for the Apple II that retold the story of Karateka with the over-top martial arts moves and exaggerated violence. In a pre-internet age, it was passed from fan to fan on copied floppy disks. Let's watch.
I first saw the game while in the high school at the computer lab in 1984, while taking AP Computer Science in the 11th grade at Mount Carmel High School in San Diego. I think I saw someone else playing it and said, "Oh, that looks awesome," so then I started. There was a much bigger story element compared to typical arcade games at the time. The most difficult, frustrating part was at the end, trying to get past the princess, because every time I got close to the princess, I'll get knocked out. So it took me many tries to figure out what to do. The name Karateka Wrath of Dude actually came from the Star Trek movie Wrath of Khan, and basically it was a story about how to get even with the princess that knocks me out at the end of the game. At about the same time, I was lucky enough to have my parents get an Apple IIe, and then later I got a software package called Take One, sprite animation kit. The project, the full animation itself took about 6 months in the first full version. At the beginning, I started doing some simple things, and then I noticed that it had a lot of potential, so I just redid the whole game in my image. What I've done originally was I made sort of a fast-moving slideshow from all the screen captures, and that was called Karateka the Motion Picture. Then later, after I got this Take One toolkit, I've edited all of my screenshots to cut the sprites out that I wanted. And then that was the beginning of Karateka 2, right? Using sprite animation instead of a slideshow. Most of the animations were done from the screenshots, but I've made some of them myself. You know, the more fancy animations like the rotating kits, the boomerang, and the rope, for example. In the opening scene, you might have seen sort of having like a temple with cherry trees. That's a background I made from trying to copy from an old calendar. I wasn't really inspired by fan work, but I did watch a lot of low-budget kung fu movies at the time. And there was also an arcade game called Double Dragon, which had some very brutal moves that gave me some inspiration. And the AP Computer Science in the 11th grade, I submitted that as a final assignment, even though it was supposed to be a programming assignment, but the instructor somehow didn't notice I wasn't doing any real programming. And then later, at a community college, I've submitted that as an assignment also, but instead of as a programming assignment, it was recorded with a video capture. Especially at the 11th grade, all of the classmates were just cracking up, especially after the awesome original version ending. However, my parents were not as impressed. People started asking for copies. However, in around 1993, I was studying undergraduate computer science at the University of Maryland, on the other side of the country. And an acquaintance there heard my full name was Eric Newman, and he was surprised that he couldn't believe he was talking to the guy that made Karateka 2. So the copies went all the way across the country. And this was the guy, I think, used the copy and then later uploaded the disk image to the internet, which is the version most people see today. I'm just overwhelmed. I mean, it was just a small thing I did in the mid '80s. So I'm just flattered and overwhelmed. I never realized it was this popular.
Commodore 64. Introduced in 1982, 5 years after the Apple II, the Commodore 64 offered impressive graphics and sold at mass market entry-level price. As such, it quickly became the most popular computing platform worldwide, which meant Brotherbone could make a lot of money if it ported Karateka to the platform. Karateka on Commodore 64. Veda Cook's Commodore 64 version of Karateka, with enhanced music provided by Francis Mechner, was on shelves in June 1985. Using the Commodore 64 special sound chip, Francis was able to create a much richer musical landscape for the cinematic scenes, including a new overture that plays over the opening crawl. I can play it again. That's Commodore 64. Music by Francis Mechner. Alright. The porting of Karateka, moving a game from one computer platform to another, was no easy task, but one that programmer and designer Veda Cook was particularly good at. Cook discusses the porting process by which she brought Karateka to the Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit computers, and what made each version unique.
So I met Jordan, it's probably like 1984, it must have been. So I had moved up from Southern California to Northern California. Doug Carlston, the CEO of Broderbund, invited me up. I think originally I was living at his house. And then I ended up, Jordan was visiting from college and I met him and we hit it off. We're very different, right? He's from just outside of New York City. His dad is this sort of, European intellectual. My family is very much Californian, so it was kind of this mixed thing. But he was, of course, fascinated with LA culture because he loved movies. And I had this sort of exotic blonde hair, tall, like volleyball player look. So it was kind of opposites attract. And then we ended up rooming together in San Rafael. And, we were kind of inseparable for a while. And he was, well into Karateka, and we just became good friends, and then I was free, and then they needed a conversion. He just asked me to do it. So Karateka came out and did very well on the Apple II. And the conversions, so the Commodore 64 was kind of a hot computer at that point. And the Atari was a little bit older and maybe not quite as popular, but it still was a viable platform. And a conversion, particularly from Apple to the Commodore 64 and Atari, they had the same microprocessor, or roughly the same, but they ran the same code. And so the ports didn't take that long to do. So in some ways it's a very satisfying, very quick thing to do, except then you had to deal with the new graphics and you had to make it work better for those platforms. I think the most difficult things about porting Karateka, one was Jordan was very exacting. So that probably would be, and because the game in some ways is very ambitious. So there's a lot of assets, and you had to keep motion smooth a certain way, and the interactions had to be very responsive. I think actually the Commodore 64 itself was a real chore, because the Commodore 64 wasn't as refined. It was much more complex in terms of what it could do than an Apple II, and that had been the previously most complex computer I'd ever worked with. And it wasn't quite as refined as the Atari in terms of how the hardware would function. And so I found very often it would do things that were not totally predictable. And a lot of people had frustration with it. I think part of it is because the engineering of the Commodore 64 wasn't quite as good. So it was a frustrating platform to work on. And I think the reason why people worked on it is because it was so incredibly popular, because it was so cheap. It was a $100 computer that did an amazing amount of things. But that to me was the most challenging. So the Commodore 64 had only one button. So for punch and kick, which was on the Apple, you had two different buttons, so you could do punch and kick separately. On the Commodore 64, we had only one button. And I believe it was Jordan who came up with the idea of a short press to do a punch and a long press to do a kick. I kind of have that memory. And it seems like Jordan to come up with that. And ultimately would have to pass muster with Jordan anyway. You know, you're trying to fit, it's not exactly a square peg into a round hole, but there are certain design compromises. And very often you have to reinterpret intent. Fortunately, Jordan was around. But it's like if you translate a book into a different language, you don't do a literal translation. There are places where language will accommodate it. So you have to kind of reshape it through the sort of artistic intent. And this was one of those compromises. I remember the music in Karateka was very important, particularly because Jordan was very much into music and the cinematic quality of it. And his dad was as well. His dad composed the music, and his dad is actually quite an accomplished composer. And on the Apple II, it didn't have the audio capability. It was single voice, and you had to kind of simulate through square wave stuff, try to modulate it. But on the Commodore version, he made them much richer. And so the music was, I believe, largely, recomposed for the platform. I think the same theme that played at the beginning of the game was part of it, but he filled it out all over the place. And Jordan's father, Francis, went to town on it. He composed the whole thing himself. And so I'd get these bulk shipments of notes that I'd have to figure out. And there were more cues put into where the sound would happen. It was a challenge on the Commodore 64 because it ran slower we couldn't get the same fluidity as the Apple. We could actually do better than that on the Atari, and that just turns out because the Atari hardware worked a certain way. So the Atari 400-800 port came after the Commodore 64 port. It was a pleasure to use. It had the same one-button joystick problem. And its audio output wasn't quite as rich and interesting as the Commodore, but it was a faster processor. Now the Atari would steal DMA cycles to draw the screen, but because Karateka had a big blue sky, you would use these scanline interrupts to change the graphics mode. So like at the top of the screen, I would switch it to low-res graphics, which were basically like big text, and just set them to big blue blocks. And it would render that, and then when I got down to the fence, turn it off, and then it would go into high-res mode. And so what that did is it probably ran at like 1.4 megahertz, so it's probably 40% faster, so it could be smoother. So in the Apple version, it would go fast and slow depending on how many things were rendering on the screen. But on the Atari, it was more likely to be at the right speed and feel more fluid, like as things were, like big objects were scrolling by. And in the dark rooms, in the later levels, you just turn off the entire graphics stuff, so it was particularly efficient. You didn't have to render anything up there, so it ran much closer, probably 1.6. And so the upshot was that it just felt better on the Atari. And I don't know, there's been many ports since. I remember seeing the IBM PC port of it, and it wasn't anywhere near as fluid. I did these conversions, and I was friends with Jordan at the very start of my career. I was a teenager at the time. And so in terms of how this fits into history, I feel a lot of pride in that this, I think, was a very significant work that changed the course of how people think about computer games. But also for me personally, it changed my relationship with Jordan, and how I think about crafting things changed dramatically as well.
Karateka on the tape. The Commodore 64 was much more popular worldwide than Apple II, and the Commodore 64 version of Karateka was distributed in many European countries on a cassette tape format. This flyer advertised the Spanish language version. And the disc. The music shop While the Apple II could only produce a single note at a time, the Commodore 64 used a special sound chip that was designed to enable true musical artistry. As luck would have it, Brother Bones was producing a piece of software called the Music Shop, which Jordan and Francis would use to craft the richer soundscape of the Commodore 64 version. Jordan Mechner biography. Brother Bones distributed this biography of this new wunderkind game developer to the press, although it mostly focused on the acclaim that Karateka had received in the months following its release. Well, let's read. Jordan Mechner, 24, is the author of the computer game Karateka, which he wrote while an undergraduate at Yale. Karateka was published by Brother Bones Software in November 1984, and 6 months later hit the #1 spot on Billboard magazine's software bestseller chart. Karateka has sold over 400,000 copies to date in the United States and abroad, earning $12 million in worldwide sales, and winning a gold certification from the Software Publishers Association. Karateka has won numerous awards, including Family Computing Magazine's 1985 Critics' Choice Award, and received outstanding reviews from almost every major publication in the field. Critical attention has focused on the game's striking visuals and groundbreaking use of cinematic techniques. Games Magazine, in its 1985 review, called Karateka stupendous, a software landmark that thrusts the player onto the heart of martial arts movie. Insider Magazine, Karateka is one of the few new arcade games that meets all the requirements of an increasingly sophisticated and demanding audience. The game is beautiful, technically interesting, cinematic, addictive, exciting, and very hard to win. Atari 8-bit. Beginning with Atari 400 and 800 in 1979, extended to the XL series in 1983, and even into the late 80s with the XE game system. The Atari 8-bit series was now a very popular computing platform worldwide. This provided another key platform on which Brother Bones could release Karateka. Karateka on Atari 8-bit, the last of what fans consider the holy trinity of Karateka versions for Atari computers, all supported by Vedacook, was released in October 1985. It just felt better on Atari. I could later say it might have been the best port for quite a while. Going insane, and the disc. So let's try to play it. I don't know, on Atari. How far can I get? Oh, we already saw that. So we start from a fighting stance. So it's just, let's run. It's just one button for the punch and the kick. I guess the difference only between how you hold it out. They just walk in the fighting stance. By the way, is that Fuji mountain at the background? I recovered a bit. Nice. For real, I got recovered again. Karateka! Karateka, karateka. There are no birds, by the way. Come on. Nice. I'm still living. Still alive. That one is harder. Some ninja. Come on. I'm dead. The end. Well, that was better the first time I played. I still don't realize controls. Alright. Yeah. Well, the Japanese kanji characters for Karateka didn't make it to the game itself. They are used in the advertisement, although they are not exactly translated accurately. Again, the game's realism and use of rotoscoping are the major selling points. You are the star of a martial arts movie so real, you'll feel like a kick in the ribs. Game Magazine's review. Pioneer video game journalists Arnie Katz and Bill Kunkel reviewed Karateka for the September 1985 issue of Games Magazine, praising its strikingly cinematic opening and calling animation the best yet produced for an Apple disc. Karateka. Devil Akuma throws Princess Mariko into a cell as you watch the voluptuous blonde sink weeping onto the floor. You know you will risk anything to free her, even if that means doing battle against the best of Akuma's karate masters. You are the star. Another cell sheet directed at retailers. This one went into even more detail about the game's features. Just like an authentic martial arts movie, and you are the star. Billboard rankings. Karateka debuted at 20 and Billboard's rankings of the top computers games on February 23, 1985. Jordan kept a chart of its progress on the weekly charts on May 11th. Just before Jordan graduated from Yale, it went to number 1 on the music charts. Madonna's Crazy For You dethroned We Are The World for the number 1 slot. Me and Madonna, Jordan World. Yo! IBM version correspondence. As the IBM computer platform began its rise to the worldwide dominance in the mid-80s, Broderbund hired an outside development studio of the Connelly Group produced an IBM version of Karateka. Jordan had a lot of issues with its quality, as shown in this correspondence between him and Broderbund. IBM screens. IBM version announcement. Karate Adventure in wide release. French version. Brazilian version. Atari ST box. Are you prepared for the fight of your life? Atari ST version screens. Oh, that looks nice. Look, Prince of Persia, I would say. I don't know, just reminds me. The fight of your life. A later advertisement for Karateka timed to the release of the version for Atari ST computer in 1988. The only way to appreciate Karateka is to see it with your own two eyes. Never before have colors been so dazzling, action figures so realistic. The reviewers have called Karateka simply amazing, an instant classic, and praised its movie-like quality. Fact sheets. Karateka goes to Japan. Look at that. PC 98 screens. While the gameplay flow and cinematic scenes were preserved in the PC 98 version, the developers took a great deal of artistic license with the color schemes, can be seen here. PC 98 flyer. Amstrad CPC screens. Computer which was popular in Europe had a much richer color palette. The playing of Karateka, the modern day video game industry is filled with designers who were inspired by Karateka. In this video clip, designers Tom Hall, Wolfenstein 3D, Ralph Koster, Ultima Online and John Tobias, while Mortal Kombat discuss their own experiences playing Karateka in the 1980s. That's 2023, the year Karateka Remastered, an all-new version of Karateka created by Digital Eclipse. Well, let's play it first.
Yeah, it was pretty hard. Started out, you got to master kind of the upper hit, the lower hit, and then the bird comes along and kills you, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I have to get good at that. Have to get good at the timing, right? The way the game unfolded those sorts of vulnerabilities and effectively rewound you, right? Like, making a mistake was a big impact.
Well, that was the hardest thing to learn in the game. He just sends his eagle, hawk, falcon, whatever. Like we just knew it was trouble, and finally learning like the timing of how to like kick it in the air or something like that, and keep sending it back and just get it to go away.
Yes, yeah, I remember trying to time it. Well, it was difficult at first, but games back then, I was an arcade rat, so I was used to. You try something, it doesn't work, you die, you start over, you try again, try something different. And Karateka was, more of that.
It was a very memorable sense of progress. Like, I've got to get through this guy again. I know what to do here. It's like, he's on the bird. Okay, I'll get ready to kick it,
Today, game design is more forgiving about that stuff, but back then it really wasn't. So you had to really memorize, right about here is when you're going to get attacked by the eagle. Right about here is when you're going to start encountering the next tier of enemy.
You gotta make sure that you get through the gates safely and they don't like crush your skull. I don't know how many times that happened, but it was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot harder, I think, than games today. I would actually say in some ways it was a little more forgiving than a lot of games back then, because you didn't insta-die in one hit from most enemies, right? The eagle was the one who most likely to kill you for quite a while. A lot of games back then were super punitive, right? Very, very challenging. And it felt to me like Karateka, because it wanted you to feel immersed in the movie, gave you a little bit of rope, right? Not a ton.
To me, the magic of games of that era was exactly that they gave you just what you needed, and then as a player you kind of filled in the blanks, like you used your imagination, and that had a big impact on me with Karateka, and that's something I carried with me into Mortal Kombat, was exactly that. It's like, hey, this is an arcade game, there's not a whole lot of place to tell stories, so we better take every advantage that we can to kind of set these things up so that the player has the tools that they need to kind of fill in blanks.
You really felt the beats of the story and the beats of the action as you march through the game. And I mean, there's so many like cool things, the cinematic scrolling, so you have like a mountain in the background and, the gates you're getting through.
Like, I think about just the sky in that game as something that, it served almost as a character, because the way the backgrounds framed you was very intentional feeling. It wasn't just random tree every, fixed distance, right? Which again is what most of those games would have done. Tree, scream tree, scream tree, right? Instead, you had a real sense of framing to it. It felt like still shots or photo shots.
And so you got a sense of you being like the protagonist, but like the antagonists are approaching you, and it takes a little while to get to them. And that cross-cutting technique just gives you a sense of tension that builds and builds and builds, and then you're facing them like, it's super effective. And it was like, again, another shocking choice to sort of use the language of cinema to convey like approach. That's like a simple thing, but it's a really powerful thing.
You had to, gosh, I'm flashing back now. You had to pay attention to where that guy was, because if it cut away to the enemy and he was coming at you from one direction, you're moving in that direction. If you kept going full tilt, odds were pretty good you'd slam right into him and get in trouble. So you actually had to remember, oh wait, he's coming. I'm going to want to slow down and give him a chance to kind of mosey in when we get close enough, right? Just to have a better tactical position. So it wasn't just that we cut away for story. It actually cued important gameplay things and gave you an opportunity to strategize a little. You really had to think about that, and it was very much a learn by failing kind of process. Which of course leads all the way up to the ending, which has one of the biggest twists that way ever.
Let me tell you the story of the entire Apple II gaming community hating Jordan Mechner.
The way the game worked is you essentially could be in combat stance or not. And you did move in and out of combat stance pretty regularly because you wanted to be able to sprint versus, edge forward.
Finally, I have killed the boss. You run into the room and there's a princess there.
So, of course, what we did was we edged in and we got close and wham. She killed us because she thought we were one of the villains.
As frustrating as that was for me the first time I got kicked in the face by her, the chance to kind of do it all over again and figure out, okay, what did I do wrong?
If you come in a non-aggressive way, it's very different.
So you have to play the whole thing again and then walk up to her. And then she's cool, thanks for saving me and all that stuff. But the moment of shock on my face when I was just taken out with one hit is like, whoosh, it's like, what?
Today we'd call it a cutscene, but it's a seamless one. You were in control and then suddenly the game takes over and you're not in control, and it's perfectly seamless. If anything, my one regret with the game was always that I wanted there to be a little bit more right after that final hug. It goes pretty quickly sort of into rolling the end. And I always wish there were a little more, that the story didn't just stop.
It really affected me as far as, how much of a sort of a feeling of a story experience you could have in a game. And you could feel emotions, even, being mad that something happened in the game. All those were, everything was just kind of fun. And so, that led me to love, character-based games and story. I think it's one of the foundational experiences that made me want to make, an Acronox, an epic RPG, or made me want to, feature more bold characters and more story content in games, just because it was it felt like a new thing and a new way to tell stories.
What comes next? Karateka was survived worldwide and Jordan Mechner was fresh out of college and wished he could do anything but what? That's remastered. Well, I'm not gonna play it. I can play. Nearly 40 years after its original release. Ooh. Ooh. Music by Francis Mechner. Oh, looks very nice. Karateka. We know that. Oh, start game, goals, act 1. That's some kind of act 2. Commentary off. On. Manual. 2 lives, 1 life, 9 lives, 10 lives, 11 lives. Plus 2 with 1. Get to the cell. This looks totally different. Waiting, who's gonna come and save her? Oh, there's a tongue.
I'm Mike Micah, president of Digital Eclipse, and I'm here to talk about the remastering of Karateka. How do you pronounce the game? That's the fun part of this whole thing, and one of the fun parts for me going into this was listening to how everybody pronounces the game that I work with. I pronounce it, and I've always pronounced it, and you're going to hear me say this all the time, is Karateka. But then I've heard people say Karateka, Karateka.
Already heard that. Why remastered?
Karateka is one of my favorite games of all time. I've even tried to port the game probably 33 years ago now, I think, when I was still in high school, to the Commodore Amiga. So for me, it was a lot of unfinished business. I wanted to get back to porting Karateka. And approaching this project, one of the things that kind of excited me and interested me most was why, outside of the holy trinity of versions of Karateka, did all the other ports just suck? And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that people didn't really understand it, or didn't have the source code, or they were just in a completely different frame of mind for this sort of game. Without specifically calling out certain platforms and certain games, what really kind of stood out to me is that people who tried to port Karateka previously approached it in a way that was very common back in the day. Very simple gameplay, very state-driven, the antithesis of cinematic, which is kind of the purpose of Karateka. It's meant to be a movie you play. And their approach was to take a game and make it feel more arcadey and feel very immediate. And as a result, it was just very unnatural and very, very hard to play.
Graphics, the gate.
The gate was just a large graphic on the Apple II, and it was just impossible to move it around. You couldn't really scroll it very quickly. But it was also a really iconic moment in the game, because when you arrive at the castle, you meet the guard and there's the gate, and that's just like every screenshot of the old Karateka game is pretty much that. And because Jordan wanted to make it parallax, there's some interesting challenges here, because I wanted to draw the gate like he would draw it on the Apple II. So I actually do line draws like you would on an Apple II. So that gate is not a 3D object. It's actually using the same kind of routines that Jordan used, but to draw it in that parallaxing way. So I wanted to approach it the same way that Choplifter and Jordan intended to draw that gate, being parallax in 3D. So it's not a 3D object, but the other thing that came out of it was the gate served as a sort of break in the gameplay of the original game, so it could show a cutscene. He mainly did that because he needed to load data into the game, and so it was a clever way to get data to load back and forth and use that break to take advantage of that. Since we didn't have that anymore, it seemed really odd to be going through this 3D gate and then have it stop and go to a cutscene. It just didn't fit anymore. So going back over the game and reading through the journals again, there was some more stuff he wanted to do cinematically with the game. Particularly, I believe, whether in conversation or in his book, he talked about having the guard start running toward Akuma to go tell him, and you see that. So this is an opportunity to have that happen. So when you get past the gate and you encounter the next player or the next enemy, when you take down that enemy, that's when the cutscene triggers, and you see the other one guard going the opposite direction to go run up to tell Akuma that somebody's arrived, and so I was able to capture that moment too.
Oh yeah. Scan lines. The power of limitations.
If I approach this as it being just a modern PC remaster, that's already been done. There was already another Karateka that was kind of a modern take on Karateka. My fascination sat with the idea that I wanted to figure out what the obstacles were to people who were porting the game and try to understand why that was so challenging. Because I think when you first look at Karateka, on its surface, you're like, all right, one-on-one combat, very simple mechanics, that should be easy to do. But it really isn't. And when you start digging into Jordan's code, you start to realize he had created basically the perfect clockwork version of a fighting game that was very cinematic, but on top of that, he had spent a couple years really optimizing everything to just work perfectly. If you just move one byte this way or one byte that way, the game breaks. And it was like the ultimate optimization. For me, to approach this then and try to port it, it's easy to do a port to a modern system because you can do anything you want. It's like, it's beyond the scope or the realm of anything else that you would need to worry about. There's no limitations, so you don't have to optimize. So in my mind, I wanted to go back and kind of approach it in the way that the team that ported Prince of Persia, Jordan's other game, did to the PC, the VGA PC. That was a version, if you look at the Apple II version, you look at the PC version, they're very different, and they play great, but the PC version is like this, it's a system that had so much more power, yet showed restraint and kind of worked within the limitations of what the original platform was so that it retained the feel and look of that original game. So for me, I created basically a fantasy platform. I created what was essentially like a VGA PC or an Amiga, very similar to the machine I originally tried to port this game to many years ago. I approached it like that. So I created my own system with its own limitations so that I had a target platform that I could take the original game and try to make it work on. And from that, I was hoping I would find all these obstacles that everybody else ran into.
They hit me harder. Another one with the helmet. Only sad. And yet another design, a cinematic approach.
The approach to the animation in the newer version of Karateka had to be very delicately handled because we did not want to remove or change any of the keyframes of the original game. By doing that, it suddenly wasn't Karateka anymore. It really had to be his father, and everything else that he rotoscoped had to stay retained in there. So what we had to do then was to make sure that those were retained, but everything in between had to be an interpolation. And we could have just used AI, we could have used any other ways to generate that animation, but it just didn't look natural. So the best approach was literally going in by hand and figuring out the weight and the distance and the travel of every bit of motion and look at those frames back and forth until you could figure out a trajectory for the in-between frames and just by hand draw those frames in. And thankfully, the game doesn't have a lot of color. Even the new version doesn't have a lot of color. So that reduced the amount of work. You can hide a lot of detail in the white of his gi. And the other costumes in the game have a lot of solid color space. So you can hide a lot of movement there and insinuate movement without doing much. So it really just kind of worked out.
Music. Scan lines. At least I know where they start from. They run, like where the boss hiding. The power of limitations.
There were a lot of things in the original Karateka that worked so wonderfully around the limitations of the Apple II. Like, Jordan would draw very large objects. And when those objects were being drawn, he wouldn't move the screen because he knew that to redraw those objects, across the screen would bring the frame rate down to an extreme crawl. So he worked really well around those limitations. And I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to have a limit of how many things I could draw, which would force me not to go overboard on everything. It doesn't mean that I didn't add flourishes or anything like that in there. There were a lot of things in his notes that he wanted to do on the original Apple version that were left on the cutting room floor because of these reasons. Like, one of those things was the main gate. So I want to make sure that this platform I was creating from scratch could at least accomplish things like that. It was more or less a platform that was going to cover just enough and improve the limitations just enough so that some of those things that Jordan wanted to put in the game originally could be done, but not more than that. I kind of want it to be kind of like perfectly in that sweet spot.
Free hits. I got a free hit combo, but almost dead. Oh, twice in a row. Come closer, beat you. Hold down to play. So that's some kind of bridge or what? The soundtrack. Come to my Mawashigiri. Now I see the scan lines. Free combo. Scan lines. Nice.
One of the other options we added to the game was scan lines because we created this fictional platform that's kind of like a PC VGA quality platform, and there's this raw pixel mode, but I also wanted it to feel like you're playing a vintage style platform from maybe like the 80s into the 90s, that this like extra version of Karateka is being ported to the system. And to do that, I want to make sure it felt like it was on a display. So we've added a scanline mode as well here, like we do in the other versions of the game, just to make it feel more connected to those older versions, but also in era, which I think is it's the way I prefer to play it, because it feels like I'm playing on something more tangible, more like a real system. Even though a modern system's real, I want something that feels like real from like the 80s.
All right. Making your memories. That's design the music now.
One of the things we also noticed is in the various versions of Karateka, and in particular one of the versions of the Commodore 64 that Veda was working on, at some point there was this alternate soundtrack. There's kind of like a rhythmic musical thing that goes on during gameplay. That was kind of interesting because most of the game is quiet. And a lot of the reason for that is because the Apple II had a single speaker, and you had one byte that you can change, and it would tell the speaker to like move in or out, and you had to like generate tones by literally making the speaker move. And that's why the sound takes over the gameplay, so there's no movement when sound's playing and all these sorts of things. And so sound was always kind of, while the music is amazing and it's just brilliantly composed, the ability to play that music has been very challenged in all these versions of Karateka, and it just squeaked by with enough of it. But most of the game is very quiet. And so when there's a lot of action, it feels weird now in the modern sense to watch a lot of action on screen but have it be silent, or have like little hits and pops. And so part of the remaster was to go in there and also add music for combat sequences to help heighten the anxiety of the player, to make it feel a little bit more important. But we didn't want to do it in such a way that was going to be competitive to or try to live up to what Francis Mechner had created for Karateka. So we're going with something, again, inspired by the Commodore 64 iterative version of the game that's a little more percussive, and ways to try and kind of like not clash with the music that was composed for the game, or to not give us an opportunity to recompose stuff because we shouldn't. So that's just used to help heighten the anxiety during fights, and to add to the feel of the game so it doesn't feel so quiet in certain parts. And then ultimately too, the music that we have in the remaster comes from all versions of Karateka, because each version had something different, and all the music was composed by Francis, so I want to make sure that we had a complete soundscape that came from his compositions.
Free hit combo. Come on. Hey, that one was smart. The end. Alright. By the way, I have many lives. What comes next? Chapter 5. I never made sequel. While Brabant wanted to get a Karateka 2 into the market, Jordan had big ideas, but they didn't stop him from considering a sequel. Bouncing Balls. In 1985, after he finished Karateka and graduated from Yale, Jordan began working on a new game. He was inspired by 2 other games that Brabant had published during Karateka's development, Lode Runner and The Castles of Dr. Creep. Both were single-screen platform games in which a small character moved up and down different levels. Well, Lode Runner, of course, everybody knows. This afternoon, while I was directing computer game ideas, Ben suggested a little guy like in Lode Runner or Choplifter as opposed to the dick people in Karateka. I quickly warmed to that idea. Little guy digitized amazingly animated with amazing joystick control and a nice big screen to run around it. The big figures just make it too claustrophobic unless it's a straight line scrolling the game like Karateka. Balls and ladders. This image and the previous one were mock-ups drawn by Jordan and his Apple II pixel art program D-Rex. The bouncing balls, like the original rover in Dead Bonds, were again inspired by the rover in 1960s television show The Prisoner. The tiny monochrome animated hero was reminiscent of those seen in a Dead Bonds prototype Choplifter and Lode Runner. Player 2. Another D-Rex mock-up shows the addition of stairs, walls, a rope, and a second character. This could be an enemy, although it could also be a second player. Jordan's notes from the era show that he was considering a 2-player mode, probably inspired by the multiplayer Dr. Creep. Hero and Miracle. For a brief span of time, the platforming project became a Karateka follow-up, as evidenced by these portraits of the hero and Miracle. In Jordan's vision of Karateka 2, the pair would adventure together. The hero portrait was based on the look of Matthew Broderick in the 1984 movie War Games. Marika goes for a swim. Jordan also considered some underwater sections for the Karateka follow-up, as evidenced by this mock-up of Mariko swimming in a bathing suit. Super Mariko. And here we see everything come full circle, with the Mariko sprite implemented into Jordan's platforms and letters game design. To accommodate for her height, there can now only be 3 vertical levels, and everything has to be larger on the screen. Even more elements. A later version of the previous mock-up, now with even more interactive level pieces, moving walls that slide out from the background, half-height walls, ropes and pits. It was not long after this that the concept ceased to be Karateka 2 and became a new game called Buckhead, later Baghdad, later to be known as Prince of Persia. Yeah, platform game design and a data sketch by Jordan with designs for a multi-level 2-player platform game. The notes compare the designs to both Lode Runner and Dr. Creep. One screen, 4 levels, no scroll and puzzle to be solved can be very tough, like Lode Runner object. Get to the elevator. Romance. Notes on another 2-player game design and character center. That's just some notes. Layers of blast guards. Another updated design sketch by Jordan, which includes guards with shoot laser blasts at the player and trapdoors. Stairs. Design for the stairs. Springy platforms. Another page from Every Line 1985 shows a design for the level layouts of the platforming game with a description of how spring-loaded platforms would work. Did some good work on the technical design of the new game. It'll work, it'll be great, I know it, I just need a theme. Mayan Temple, Egyptian Pyramid, Greek Temple, futuristic spaceport, medieval dungeons, ruins of the 20th century metropolis, Karateka 2 Peach. Although Jordan had moved on from wanting to create a Karateka follow-up, Brabant was hard to get a sequel into the market. Since Jordan retained the intellectual property rights, he had to approve any sequel, even he wasn't involved. This sequel pitch was apparently sent to Jordan by Broderbund. Karateka 2. This will be a direct sequel to original Karateka. However, the player will be made to feel he is battling his way through a complex structure rather than just fighting a tunnel. The storyline will be the hero finds out the nasty warlord Maurice is coming to destroy the village and his contents to avenge the death of his brother Akuma. As a hero, he decides to beat him to the punch by invading his island stronghold and doing unto him before he can do it until. Alright, Karateka 2 storyboard first. In the summer of 1986, Broderbund had one of the his house designers, probably ex-Disney animated Gene Portman, put together these storyboard-style gameplay ideas for Karateka 2. These first two images describe trapdoors and statues that came to life to fight the player. Trapdoors opens. Statues born in the door come to life and attack player. Doors slide open if player wins. Karateka 2 design document was used to be our proposal that originated at Broderbund that sent to Mechner. This is a more formal design document that lays out the proposed pieces of sequel. Alright, later to Broderbund, August 1986. After receiving the storyboard from Broderbund, Jordan decided to pitch the publisher the idea of him writing the story and general design for Karateka 2 and participating in a supervisory capacity, but having another programmer do the heavy lifting. He wrote up his own vision of the storyline for Karateka 2 and sent it to the publisher alongside this letter discussing his proposed arrangement. Jordan's Karateka 2 story. Finally, here's Jordan Mechner's vision for Karateka 2 Part 2. For Karateka Part 2, this sequence of pages assembled from fragments of two different drafts goes into detail about the storyline, which would have begun in America's Cell immediately after the events of the first game. While Jordan and Broderbund were still in negotiations of the Karateka 2 as late as 1987, they never reached an agreement. Karateka 2012. In 2012, Jordan worked with a small team at Liquid Entertainment to produce an all-new version of Karateka for PC and consoles. Oh, look at that. Replay. In 2024, first second books will release Jordan Mechner's replay, an autobiographical an autobiographical graphic novel about three generations of the Mechner family. These preview panels from the book encompass Jordan's retelling of the Karateka story. Making games. Then until age 13 my plan was to be a cartoonist. Then the Apple II came along. Drawing went out the window. All I wanted was a computer. I had saved up almost enough money drawing caricatures at local fairs. My sister Emily lent me the rest. Software was on the cassette tapes. To load it to the computer you had to connect your own tape recorder. I learned programming from magazines and game design from playing games. I dreamed of making a hit game. I spent my teenage years trying, but my efforts seemed to always be 6 months behind the curve. Making games then. No one would publish my arcade game knockoffs. I almost flunked the freshman year of college. Stack overflow bag. Shouldn't you be studying for the Leonard midterm? That summer I filmed my mom's karate teacher with a Super 8 camera and traced the footage frame by frame to create rotoscoped animation. My dad put on a gi to model some additional non-karate moves I needed. Climbing up cliff. It took me until senior year to finish Karateka, my first published game. Rescuing a princess, Joe, how could you? That's human interest. After 7 years and 10,000 hours, the Apple II finally paid off for itself. For a student loan bill, April royalty check. In the 1980s, the field was so new, we just made the things up as we went along. Oh boy, the end. Karateka's impact. Drawing on his love for films, a passion for storytelling, and a fascination with technology, Jordan Mechner captured imaginations with his groundbreaking debut. Game designers discuss its impact and legacy nearly 40 years later. Time flows on. While Karateka 2 never came to be. The initial designs led to Jordan's hit series Prince of Persia, but that's another story.
So when Karateka was finally published, I guess I was a senior in college. It was my senior year by the time it was finally published and released. And I remember for the first few months, it was kind of a letdown. It seemed like it was going to be a flop, that it wasn't going to sell well. And that was because, I mean, in retrospect, it's because in those days there was no marketing, there was no advertising for games. Because it shipped in, I think, November or December. It just took a few months before anybody really found out that the game was out there. Word of mouth built very slowly. So I went back to school after the winter holiday, kind of thinking, well, worked for a couple of years on this game and, it's good, I'm proud of it, but it's not really doing anything. It's not, it's not gonna, be a big hit or change my life in, the ways that I was dreaming of. And then slowly it kind of started to build, and I think it was in the spring that we found out that it was #1 on Billboard magazine's chart. And then the first big check arrived, and it was like, it wasn't just more than I had ever earned by my own efforts before. It was like it paid for my tuition for that year. I spent 3 or 4 years making Prince of Persia. That whole time I was living off the Karateka royalties, but Karateka made Prince of Persia possible.
Right. It's easy to care about story now because everyone has to, right? Story is, in most games, considered like a mandatory aspect. Jordan predates all of that. I think he really was one of the early pioneers of story and video games can go together and they can complement one another, and the game's more interesting because it has a story. I think he was one of the first people to really push that idea.
He was always willing to work with other people and wanted to have creative control, but he saw them more like movies. He saw it being a collection of talents, and that didn't bother him at all. I think it's obvious now that that's where everything was going. If you look at all the huge sellers now, they all have the movie metaphor. And I think Jordan not only saw that, but knew how to do that, or was willing to learn how to do that long before most others did.
Yeah, I think the big thing about Jordan first is he's multidisciplinary. And I think that's one of the things that all the top designers, when you go back and you look at who are the people who've really kind of rerouted the course of video game history, it tends to be people like that who either have come from other fields or have significant training in other fields and are able to do mashups with what video game potential is. Jordan's kind of a quintessential example of that, right? When you look across the kind of the history there, right? And whether you start with Karateka and you go to Prince of Persia and then forward with that franchise and his later involvement, what at each step, what each of those big leaps has done is tend to change or reorient our way of thinking about doing video games. And I think that comes because he isn't just coming at it as, oh, I can make a video game, right? He's coming at it as, I can make a work and I can bring to this work things from other disciplines, other parts of life, other craftsmanship, other skill sets. Just the fact that he documented what he was doing in the way he did is deeply unusual. That isn't the mode that most people work in. He's a super smart guy who brought to bear tools that most game devs just didn't have. And that's what led him to be able to create things that most game devs at the time couldn't make.
I didn't know who he was, I didn't know his age. But I remember the beginning of the game, it was, a game by Jordan Mechner, came up on the screen. And so it's like, I didn't know who Jordan Mechner was, but I wanted to be like Jordan Mechner. It's like, I want to make a game. I have stories to tell, I can make pixels.
Well, what did you think of computer games at this time, 1980, 81, 82?
I saw it as one of the huge applications of computers. Any futurist could look ahead and see that the computer, even though it was a very primitive thing at that time, that it would revolutionize the world. I mean, everybody saw that, but not the degree to which it did.
There was a 5-year period where Karateka was it. It was the model. And I think what's amazing about that is that, you know, the pace at which innovation was happening back then, the pace at which ideas were blooming, you know, 1 year then was like 5 years now, right? So that means it kind of really stuck out as a precursor of everything that games would be.
I kind of expected that computer games would become important, but that wasn't influencing me in how I related to you. You know. I wasn't thinking of it as a business thing. I just thought of it as one of your passions that should be developed to the full, you know, pursued to its logical conclusion.
So you were interested in these computer games just because I was interested in them?
Yeah, entirely. I mean, I had no interest in them at that time. I never played a computer game. Didn't expect that I would ever.
100 years from now, people are going to look back at Karateka, and they're going to see the very beginning of what by then will be a vibrant interactive medium that has evolved far beyond film, far beyond what we know today, because it had humanity. It borrowed elements from film that made film relevant to most people, not just geeks, right? About people and stories and about emotion. One reason that video games are so popular is because of the emotions they evoke. And prior to that, prior to Jordan, so much of it was about violence or satisfaction or the tension. And this is the first game I had ever seen where somebody fell in love.
It's not that we didn't have really big swings at storytelling. We did, right? Like, some of the stuff that was happening in the Infocom games in plain text was huge, just really big swings. But they weren't graphical, they weren't visual, right? And I think what Karateka really brought to the table was sort of filmic language in a bunch of ways. The shot framing, the crawl, scene setup, cross cuts, seamless integration of action and drama. All of those things are, to my mind, what Karateka really laid the groundwork for.
I think that Karateka will stand the test of time as one of the most elegant, the most cinematic, and most carefully crafted game experiences that's ever been done. It's just a jewel that still holds up to this day as one of the most classic games ever, one of the most powerful storytelling games ever, and one of the games that has a quality bar in every second and every pixel of the game. It's amazing.
Okay, I think they've got enough. Yeah.
So that's it. 5 chapters. Well, this is look at that. Explorer 93%, 78% Explorer, 88%, there's 79%. So chapter 3, 93%. Well, let's listen to some music at the end. Where it was. Right here, the music of Karateka, an audio journey. Let's listen to some music.
As you make your way toward modern video game, you are all Mechner Music Podcast. Hello, noble warriors. Kirk Hamilton here. I host a music podcast called Strong Songs, and I'm here today to break down the music, the very strong music, for a very important video game. This music, composed by the great Francis Mechner, wound up setting the template for a lot of video game music that would come in the decades after it, but this game was one of the first. Of course, the music I'm talking about is the music for the game that you are all now playing, Jordan Mechner's 1984 martial arts adventure, Karateka. Karateka may seem like a simple game when you look at it and compared to most modern video games it is, but it was actually at the vanguard of a lot of pretty cool things, particularly with regard to narrative. You play as a lone hero trying to rescue the Princess Mariko from the evil Akuma, and as you make your way toward her and toward your final showdown with Akuma, he dispatches different enemies toward you. Sometimes his hawk comes and attacks you. And there's kind of this sense of narrative unfolding over the course of the game. That narrative is greatly enhanced by Francis Mechner's music, which uses a technique called leitmotif to establish different motifs or themes for characters and events to give you a sense of a narrative unfolding musically in addition to the narrative that's unfolding in front of you on the screen. Leitmotif is most commonly associated with the mid-19th century operas of Richard Wagner. That's why you will sometimes hear it referred to as Wagnerian leitmotif, though for our intents and purposes I'm mostly just going to call them motifs. So we're going to get into those motifs here, and I'm going to hopefully help explain how they're working musically, which will then explain how they're working in terms of the game's narrative and the sort of overall flow of Karateka, helping tell that story and build that narrative. My goal is that when you play the game after having listened to this, you'll have a kind of clearer sense of those motifs and how they're working in the service of the narrative, and that more broadly you'll have a better sense of leitmotif in general, because it's not just in this game, it turns up all over the place. It's a really cool concept, and it lets you kind of unlock the musical storytelling that's going on in a lot of different art across the artistic spectrum. The music for Karateka was composed by Francis Mechner, Jordan Mechner's father, and if you're looking at the notes that are in this museum, you can see that Francis was actually really involved in a lot of the development of the game, and the music is an important part of the game, but he also just had a lot of input into the overall game, which is really cool because he just seems like a really cool guy. He was one of those true Renaissance men. He was a scientist, and that was kind of what he did professionally, but he worked with the Children's Television Workshop on Sesame Street. He was a painter, and he was also a musician. He was a pianist, and a very good one. Not only was he one of the very first video game composers, he was also just a great concert pianist. What you're hearing right now is actually his performance of Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu, which is no joke on piano. I mean, I certainly can't play it, let alone this well. Mechner was coming from the world of classical music when he wrote the motifs for Karateka, and you can hear that in the music. It is unusual. You don't hear these kinds of harmonies in most video games, and that makes the Karateka soundtrack stand out even all these years later. So let's go through all these motifs. First of all, a note up front, I am using the Commodore 64 version of the soundtrack because that is richer, because the Commodore 64 was capable of more simultaneous pitches than the Apple II. And there is an interesting difference there, but I kind of want to stick with the one that has all of the notes instead of the one that only has a few, even though the Apple version sounds kind of cool. Of course, you can play either the Apple or the Commodore version in this collected version of the game. Just to give you a sense up front though, so you can hear what they both sound like right here, this is the Apple version of the main Karateka theme. And this is the Commodore 64 version, which has way more notes, as you'll hear. It's a dramatic difference, and it really shows how far the technology came in just a few years. The Apple II came out in 1977, the Commodore 64 came out in 1982, and I mean, the Apple II is just repurposing its speaker to make single tones to sort of generate something approximating music. While the Commodore 64 had an onboard multi-timbral synthesizer, which means it could make multiple voices at once, it was designed to make music, and it gives a game composer so much more flexibility. Here's that same music on the Commodore. You hear how the note fades out, how these multiple pitches work with one another. It's a night and day difference between that and this. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but the Commodore version is actually a little bit flat compared to the Apple version. That means the notes are a little bit lower. The Apple version is tuned to the A440 standard, which is the standard tuning for most instruments these days. The Commodore 64 version is a little bit flat. It's like, I don't know, 7 cents flat or something. So I have retuned my sampled piano so that I can play along with the Commodore version, and everything you're going to be hearing is a little bit under A440. So to those of you with perfect pitch listening to this, sorry. That main triumphant but minor keyed theme from Karateka is probably the most important single motif in this soundtrack. Just to run down the other ones, there is Akuma's theme. There's Mariko's theme, the captive princess theme. And there's one more motif that isn't really attached to a character, it's more just the danger theme, and it plays whenever something threatening or dangerous happens. There's also a softer version that hints at the danger without being explicit. It's something that Jordan Mechner was clever about when he was implementing Francis's music. He used different waveforms for his synthesizers to get softer or harsher tones, which sometimes can be kind of jarring because he didn't have that much to work with, like even the Commodore's hardware wasn't that sophisticated, but it let him get very different textures out of a fairly limited overall sound palette. Like compare the very soft triangle or sine waves of the Princess theme with the much harsher kind of saw waves of that main Karateka theme. That kind of creative synthesizer orchestration turns up a lot in video games from this era, from the 1980s. I think it's really interesting because, these composers and game developers weren't working with all that much. They couldn't have a whole orchestra, but they could manipulate the synthesizers to get these different tones, which gives you a sense that each piece is being played by a different instrument, even though, of course, they're all being played by the same instrument. The Commodore version of Karateka gets to experiment with that kind of orchestration right off the bat. During the opening text crawl on this version of the game, there's music behind it that actually opens with the sound of the wind, which is very dramatic. And then the music comes in, weaving together all of the motifs that you're about to hear in the game that you're about to play. It's very much in the mode of an opera's overture, which takes the same approach. So even just in this short amount of time, you've actually heard all of the main motifs from the game mixed together to tell this condensed version of the game's story. For starters, there is that Karateka theme. This is also what you hear at the very beginning of the game when you first take control. This is the theme that you hear. So we're in the key of A minor, and what I think is interesting about this motif is that it's actually very unresolved. It's kind of jangly and vertical and intense, and it ends in a very unresolved place, which is kind of unusual. I think this game begins with a lot of tension, and even the main motif is very tense. We're in the key of A minor. That first chord is an A minor. I'd call the second chord a B half diminished over F, and the final chord is an E dominant seventh chord, which is very tense, and it wants to resolve back to the A minor, but it doesn't get to resolve. This motif actually ends on an unresolved 5 chord, which is a good way to make it just sound like it's going somewhere. It's a great way to begin an adventure, because you don't begin on a resolution. You begin on some tension, which of course Karateka begins narratively in a very tense place. The melody that plays over those chords is also pretty intense. It's fairly strident, just these ascending arpeggios going through those 3 chords, and I really like that middle part of the melody in particular. Those last 2 notes are a B and an F, also known as a tritone. It's a very dissonant interval and just nice and crunchy, really creates that sort of dissonance and intensity right here at the very beginning. Throughout the game, those strident ascending arpeggios are associated with our hero most clearly every time you win a fight. The victory music is a quick major key rendition of the same theme. So that's our hero, but what of our villain? The first cutscene of the game actually shows Akuma and the Princess Mariko and plays both of their motifs, so let's look at those two. First of all, we've got Akuma's motif. I love this as a villain motif because it's so gnarly. Just the synth sounds so gnarly. It kind of rips in almost like this like robot mulcher or something. We're still in A minor, and that motif just kind of goes really quickly up this chromatic thing, going from A to C and then just up. It almost sounds a little bit bluesy. If you slowed it down, maybe added a little swing to it, you'd get something a little like this. I don't think that that's what Francis Mechner was going for, but I'll always hear it that way. Immediately after Akuma's theme in the opening cutscene, we hear the princess's theme because he is there with her, putting her in her prison cell. We are, of course, still in A minor. This whole game is in A minor, which lets them switch seamlessly between motifs without having to change keys. This motif actually has two voices. It's the only motif that has two lead voices that are in harmony with one another. The top voice plays these notes, and the second voice plays these notes. So when you put them together, you get this. And as the door to her prison cell slams shut, we hear Karateka's final motif, the danger motif. The most straightforward motif in the whole game, this one plays whenever Akuma dispatches a new henchman to try to stop the hero. This is just a simple 4-note motif starting on E flat and ending on E. It's a chromatic line, which means that it's moving by half steps, which is the shortest distance between notes on the piano according to the Western chromatic scale, and it's the tightest interval you can have, which just gives it that kind of close, uncomfortable feeling. Playing two notes a half step apart right next to each other is a very dissonant sound, and half steps are commonly used in film scores and in opera to denote evil and danger. One of the most famous danger motifs of all time, after all, is just a simple half step. Okay, you get it. With those motifs established, Karateka basically just follows that formula throughout the entire run of the game. There's no background music, it's just motifs, and you can follow the story very clearly along with the motifs. Whenever we see Akuma, we hear some version of Akuma's motif. Whenever we see the princess, we hear some version of the princess's motif. Whenever Akuma dispatches an enemy, we hear the danger motif. Whenever we see the hero, we hear the heroic motif. With all of those motifs in your ear, you can go back to the intro music that plays during the text crawl in the Commodore 64 version, and you can hear how Francis Mechner wove all of the different motifs together very clearly. We start with the danger theme, then Akuma's theme and the hero's theme play at the same time, with the princess's theme after. Something similar happens toward the end of the game. When the hero finally breaches Akuma's fortress, you hear a combined version of their two themes. When he reaches the princess's cell and faces off against Akuma, you hear something very similar. Musically, the two motifs are at battle with one another, just like the two characters are at battle on the screen. The princess is also there in the background, and her motif takes a similar place in the musical arrangement. And if the hero can defeat Akuma and rescue the princess, when the two of them embrace, you hear a version of the princess's motif that is moved into A major, a much brighter and happier sound that turns those mournful, soft, rounded synths into something really lush and beautiful. Secure in our happy ending, we get a final little epilogue. Some text comes up on the screen, and as it does, Mechner's most complex music actually begins to play. This is different than the music that's played throughout the rest of the game, and while it contains elements of some of the other motifs, it's really just a lovely composition by Francis Mechner. It's a contrapuntal composition, specifically a two-voice contrapuntal composition, which means that two different voices are moving in counterpoint with one another. You can picture it as kind of two different lines, two different melodies that combine together to create the harmony of the piece. The bottom melody is in the bass clef, and it's just kind of moving around, just nice and steady like this. And the top voice is up higher in the treble clef. It's a little bit jumpier. There are larger spaces in between the intervals that are playing, and between the two voices, they imply this nice chord progression that kind of goes from A major to C sharp to F sharp minor, moves back and forth, changes keys quite a bit. It's got that nice B half diminished chord from the original Karateka motif, and it's just a nice rolling musical coda at the end of our adventure. And those are the musical motifs that play out over the course of Jordan Mechner's Karateka. From his strident heroic anthem to his crushing chromatic villains theme, Francis Mechner admirably combined Wagnerian leitmotif with the limitations of 1980s computer sound hardware to help set the precedent for a generation of video game composers while telling a musical story unlike any that had been told before. I hope you liked this audio explainer and that it gave you a new perspective on the music of Karateka. Thanks for listening and enjoy the game.